Because it was much more than a job. It was finally that gig that was my thing. I loved everything about it. I didn't dislike Olivia at all, but with the way we were selling her was that she was this super supreme geek that loves Star Wars and loves video games. None of that was true. The flip side of that was Morgan Webb. Morgan knew more about video games than anybody I've ever met. The executive producers came downstairs and said, "Get out off the monitor right now." I said, because our feed was always going out to the E-Lobby live, and they would get super upset when they tried to take James Gunn off of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. There are jokes that he was talking about in there that we did on Attack of the Show, and James worked on Attack of the Show. It's probably good that we don't do some of those things now, but he wasn't apologizing for what we did. That was some of the most fun we ever had. When Frost did what she did, a lot of those fans started saying, you know what, maybe Attack of the Show wasn't as cool as I thought it was. Now you did the one thing I didn't want you to do, which was ruin our legacy. On the surface, people look at it and go, G4 failed because of Frost. And it's like, no, there's a whole other story, and there's a lot of questions.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. Today we are going to talk a little bit more about G4TV and Attack of the Show. I have with me G4TV production alum, Christopher Flynn. So we're going to talk about his memories working there at Attack of the Show. We'll also talk about our shared frustrations with the disability program here in the U.S. It's a huge mess. And we're talking about today, and I'll show it here. If you would be interested in supporting Chris's GoFundMe, that would be of great help. Welcome to the show, Chris. Thank you for coming on to CultureScape.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, you and I tried to hook up several times to come on the show, especially like last year, but things just kept happening. Mostly on my side of things, but I'm glad we could finally fix that.
No, it was good because I've enjoyed listening to your interviews, so I was looking forward to doing it.
Nice. Yeah, you were kind enough to reach out when I was talking about my own frustrations I've had with disability. We'll get into that, and you were like, "Hey, I'd be willing to talk with you about this." I was like, oh, "Okay." Well, I had said, "Is anyone interested in talking about this?" And someone did. I was like, "I guess I have to." Then.
Yeah, it's a nightmare process, and like that, having my own experience with it. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you're having to deal with it, like anybody having to go through it.
Yeah, it's in fact let's just start here and then we can work our way back if we have to. I did not know, and you can share your story, of course. I did not know prior to applying for Social Security disability how broken and bad the system was. I don't think the majority of people do.
No, and it's one of these things that, it goes on and on with all of this dysfunction, and people don't realize because they don't pay any attention to it until they need it. And then suddenly they find themselves having to, fight these headwinds and get through this system. And then they discover how horrible it is.
Yeah. I hear this even too for people who are like physicians and doctors, like, oh, you have this medical illness. Of course you'll be able to get disability. Of course. You're a sick person. Obviously, that social safety net will be just right there to catch you. No, not really the case. A lot of holes in that net.
Yeah, the dirty secret is that everyone involved in that system who has to deal with that system on a regular basis, they all know how dysfunctional and corrupt it is. And yet it doesn't change. But I think one of the things when I heard about your case was, that now there's a new head of Social Security, and people who are applying now with new cases, they benefit from the changes they're making, which are designed to speed up the process, eliminate some of the red tape, and then make sure that more people are being approved, because they had been, kind of chopping down how many people would be approved even before Trump. But then I was told by two different disability attorneys when Trump came into office, they just laid it down and said, deny everybody. Yeah. And then deny everybody's appeal. So except for extreme cases, like if you see in the news, there was a guy a couple months ago where it had a forklift fall on him and cut him in half. Obviously they're going to approve him. Yeah. he was lucky he even survived that. But they're going to approve a case like that. They're not going to argue with it. Short of something like that, the denials were like 90% on initial claims, and then there were denials of 80% on appeals. And they gutted the entire system. They also cut all the personnel and made such a backlog that it was taking forever to get these things done. And, like the Pasadena hearing office here in LA averaged 18 months, for just the hearing process. And they've got this new head of Social Security, and they had been trying to fix the system, since Biden came in, but it's still way too slow and way too many, people being rejected. So now this new person's taken over, and he's trying to make these changes, and they apply to people who are starting now. Unfortunately, the rest of us are already stuck in our system.
And to give people an idea of how bad it is, I think so. Most people, like I was saying, they think if they have a serious illness that they cannot work, because the work climate definitely is, and I've heard this from so many people who are employers that they just kind of like, they sadly admit it. They're like a little sheepish, but it's like, this is how it is. It's very hard to have a serious medical disability and get work right now. We're too high risk. They don't know what to do with us. They're afraid that we'll become more high risk over time, like legally, or we'll just never be able to get rid of this person. It'll just be a litigious nightmare. So people, of course, then say, well, I'm going to then turn to disability Social Security. And disability Social Security, for people who don't know, basically there are two kinds, but it's all under the same people. You either have enough work history so you can get for Social Security disability insurance, which is basically you're just kind of pulling from the Social Security that you put in, that you pay out every time you get a paycheck. Or SSI, which is there for people who, they were too sick and they're never able really to work. And the way this is how the attorney that I've talked to basically explained it. The problem is fundamentally is that there are too many people that actually need disability, and there's just not enough money for it. So they basically have enough money for about 10 million people who are disabled, and that's for birth to death. Okay, so that's all ages, and they don't even really have money for that, and they can't expand it out. But the problem is, there are new disabled people every year, and then the disabled people are not dying off fast enough. So basically, the way they have dealt with this since the 70s, because they've had underfunding problems in the 70s, is we're just going to deny everyone when they first apply, and then we're going to wait it out. And the ones who are really sick, the ones who really need it, they will go through the hassle of going through the process multiple times and getting it, because obviously those are the ones that need it. And it's like, well, if they die waiting, sucks to be them. I mean, it's madness, but it was I'll give the Biden administration credit. They were trying to finally get to update on the labor book. So this is how, if you go through Social Security and you get to hearing some people who've done this, people are like, well, this person says he has a bad back, but I say he can work this job as like a elevator operator. And you're like, elevator operator? Are there any of those left? Well, it turns out the labor book is from the 1970s, and the 1970s would have things like elevator operator, pneumatic inspector, all kind of like jobs that obviously do not exist anymore. But that's how you were getting disability. And I know I talked a lot there, but I just kind of want to give people who've never been through this just a slice of the madness.
Yeah, they even listed jobs that you would think are still active, like film projectionists. But they said that's not a viable employment anymore. Because everything's become automated, digitized. So people can't realistically get employment as a film projectionist anymore. Really,
I'm sure that would be a job though you would enjoy, Chris. Maybe.
I've floated around, and I've spent a lot of time in projection booths, and so especially when I was younger and everything was on film. And we had a whole thing in Florida. I was north of Clearwater, which is on the Gulf Coast, in the Tampa area, and I was one of the kids who worked like the 5 video stores and managed it, and then all my friends worked at the movie theaters and the video stores, and when I wasn't working, I was hanging out at the movie theater. So, a lot of times I'd have the benefit of going up in the booth and just hang out up there and watch.
That's a good segue. So how do you find yourself working at a place like G4?
I came in, I think 2 months after Olivia Munn in 2006. And I was there to interview for the job and, the full-time job. And I mentioned my rate, and he started to back off. Like, whoa, And I said, look, I'm like the Saturn of TV people. I'm not haggling with you. I'm telling you that's the lowest rate I will do the job for, which is simply a little bit above what I made at my last job. And that's all it is. And he said, well, we got to talk to other people. And yes, but he said, we'll use your freelance. And I said, I would love it. Yeah, that would be great. So I came in and I just started freelancing. And then the other people who were freelancing after the guy had left, they had other big gigs, because they were big TDs who were filling in. And I pretty much was doing it full time, but I was doing it as a freelancer, which was great for me because I was getting a freelance rate out of it. And in that time, I fell in love with the program. I suddenly, it reached a point where I had to leave, because the drive was really bad. I was in Studio City at the time. The show was down in Santa Monica, and I was just getting killed on the commute. So I finally said, you guys have to, put somebody in the position, which they were supposed to be doing, but they were dragging it out, hoping I would just stay. And when I was leaving, and they were so great the day I was going, like they made a whole, cake, Corey, who used to be the tech manager, there was a big kitchen in the old G4 building, and she would cook, on special occasions and stuff. So she made a big cake, and she made a big pot of jambalaya and stuff. And it was great. It was like a whole thing. And I was leaving crying, going, I think I've made a huge mistake. And just said, well, I don't think the guy who took over is going to stay very long, because he came down from Sacramento and he'd been doing mostly news and stuff that was built for him. And this show required building a lot of things. And they kind of screwed him because there was new equipment. There was a brand new state-of-the-art switcher that was supposed to be put in. But Comcast had said, you can't install any equipment. You have to work with what you've got, because they knew the merger was coming between E and G4. And so here this guy comes down thinking he's going to have this job on this new state-of-the-art switcher. And they're telling him, no, you got to work on this old one, which was old technology that was a completely different way of doing things. And it was much more manual, much more like we always say muscling through it, because there's not automation cues there for you. You have to actually make it all happen, and do it quickly. And he wasn't familiar with that kind of gear at all. So he was put in a very bad position. I recognize that. But when he came down, first thing he starts asking me is not about the shows, not about the equipment. He started, so what's the freelance market like down here? And I was like, oh, he's not going to last. He's not, he took the job so he could get into the freelance market, but he's going to go. And then he did have some trouble. Like, G4 had decided for Attack of the Show to start doing an effect at the beginning where a panel would slide in and it had a video box teasing what's coming up in the show, right? And it was a simple effect. The swoop was animated, and then you just had to make a little video box that would match the slide, and then just slide it in. That was it. But the effects box that was required, he had never worked on that, and it worked completely differently from how it worked on the switchers. So they had to book me for a 10-hour day to come in and build that thing, and it took me like 15 minutes to build. And so he was feeling the pressure because they're going back to him going, we just had to pay him 10 hours at a higher rate to come in and build something that took, 15 minutes. You should have been able to build that. And then he got kind of drunk at the Christmas party. And I heard that, like him and the fill-in director called me. I was working at E, and they called me from the Christmas party, both clearly drunk. And they were talking shit about people. And I was like, oh, this is going to be bad. And so by the time I got back there, they were saying, yeah, there's a few people who were trying to push him out the door because if he said some things that upset some people at the Christmas party. He's like, oh. So he got another job and he left. And I thought he was going to last 6 months. He lasted 6 weeks. But I had told myself as I was leaving, I don't think he's going to last very long. If the job opens up again, then I'll take it and I'll actually stick with it, this time. So he called me to give me a heads up, say, listen, I'm going. This is not working out. And I got another gig. And they had announced the merger by then. He was terrified because he was the new guy in, that they were going to cut him in the merger. And I said, not really, because he only has one TD. G4 has one TD. it's not like they have redundant positions, so I think you'll be fine. I said the only weird scenario would be if they offered it to me instead, because I had a long history with E. And I said, I won't take it under those circumstances. It's your job, So he left on his own, and then they were angry with him. They were going to blacklist him in town. And I was like, calm down. You put him in a bad position to start with. And he was terrified. I said, I heard it in his voice, how scared he was, that he wasn't going to survive this merger. So I said, he did what he had to do, and so they forgave him. And so we were able to get him back in as a fill-in, from time to time, when I would take off. But so I got caught up in that whole merger, and it just worked out well because I had experience at both places and knew how they both did, work. So I was like, I can kind of help merge the two operations, and that worked a lot. But then it got tricky because I was the primary fill-in at E, and I was also the primary fill-in at G4, and so they would argue over who gets to have me, that day. And then E would always put their foot down and say, we're running things after the merger. You don't want to piss us off. So basically he comes up here to cover E, and you guys figure it out. And I was like, oh, I don't want to make anybody mad. Just, let's just, everybody play nice. But once the merger was done and we had built the new studio and launched everything, then they asked me to stay on full time. And
so how many years were you working with G4?
Well, I was freelance from like August 2006 through April 2007. And then the end of April 2007, we relaunched, and then I stayed on full time. But I was a full-time freelancer, which is weird because I was there full time and I had benefits and everything, but I was still technically a freelancer.
So were you with G4 till it basically closed shop, or at least twilight years?
Yeah, there were some people in the last few months after they announced what was happening who left, and they were worried I was going to go, but I said, I'm going down with the ship. I said, I'm staying here until we're done, because it was much more than a job. It was finally that gig that was my thing, and I loved everything about it. They could be a little difficult to deal with, but they were always pushing the bar, and I respected that. It was like, I could be at some job where I don't have to push myself to do things and be bored out of my mind. Or I can be at this job where they come in and they ask me, like the one day, Mike Shaw, who was like the best, he was like the director. When G4 came back, Mike was the executive producer on the new attack of the show. But back in the day, he would do all of like the cinematic bits, all of the comedy, really big comedy bits. And he was Batman. Every time, like Batman would suddenly pop in and go, Pereira. And that was always Mike Shaw. So Mike came one day and said, today we're going to do Watchmen. And I had seen the movie, and that was always part of my power with that job, was that, they didn't have to explain these things to me, saying, well, look, it's a parody of this movie, that we want to do, or a parody of this nerd TV show. I already knew it, So, and I also had the film background, so I could use the effects to, make it match film looks, specific looks. So like the first big thing they did when I started there was a parody of 300, and they did a great job on it. I mean, they did costumes, and the makeup department put the abs on everybody, and they had the props and everything was great. Now my job was to make it look like the movie and try to match the look and film grain to it. So I was able to do that. And that's the stuff I love doing, get to use my film stuff, which I mostly didn't get to use. But we did Watchmen and they wanted to match it. And I'm like, the Dr. Manhattan effect was extremely complicated for them to do in film, never mind us to do it in a TV studio with about 2 hours to work with. And then every time I got it billed, because I had like 4 effects banks in the consoles, and I would be using my resources to build these effects. And if it wasn't for live on the show, I could use all 4 effects banks to do it. Well, I'm building this thing, and then every time they would come back and go, oh, well, yeah, but see, there's something we're doing here, so you're going to have to be able to do that too. And I'd be like, okay, so now I have to cut it down to 3 effects banks. And then it kept going until finally I had to build it all into 1 effects bank. And then they said, oh yeah, and Allison Hayslip is going to be live in the shot interacting with Dr. Like, okay, so I have to work in another key of Allison Hayslip, and but we built it and it looked just like the movie. And which also was compliment to they had Ross, who was a guy on X Play, and he was one of the producers, but he also was a like fitness freak. And so they had him be Dr. Manhattan because he was all ripped, and Emily, who did the makeup, did a beautiful job on it, made him look like Dr. Manhattan there. And so my job was to kind of add the ghostly effect, to it and make the whole thing work, and then match the movie, and then put Allison Hayslip in there with him, even though they weren't in the same place at the same time. And it all came together. And the last night, the night we wrapped and had the wrap party for Attack of the Show, Mike came up to me and said, he brought that thing up, and he said that was like his favorite moment. Because when they pitched that in the story meeting, he said, that's never going to happen. We're never going to be able to do that live. And the fact that we did, and it looked even better than everybody expected, was a cool thing. And that was the kind of stuff I love doing there.
It really was an interesting, it was pretty unique because it's a daily show, right? And you're doing it live most of the time. And you just, you never quite, that's kind of part of the appeal, I think, for the viewer was you never quite were sure what they were going to do next. But I guess I hadn't thought of it exactly, but you're right. From a production standpoint, for a lot of people, that'd be a nightmare because they're like, I have no idea what they're going to ask me to do tomorrow. It could be something so crazy and impossible.
Well, yeah, and for a lot of people, they didn't build like that. They didn't, get super creative. I mean, the way I always built was, in a way, kind of breaking things to make them do things that I need them to do that they're not designed to do. Was usually my kind of base position on things. Like, yeah, I know it's not designed to do that. That's why people think it can't be done. But I know that if I make it go screwy, I can actually make it do what I need it to do. If I kind of tweak this off and I break that, and and of course not breaking things permanently. It's just, making them, all malfunction in a way that now they're doing what I need them to do. And that would work, because, we didn't have a lot of time and resources, but then when they would do the things that would up the game on some of the stuff, I just wanted to be able to do my part too, and contribute to that.
So what were, and I feel like I have to ask the obvious question, but like, what was working with Kevin Pereira and Olivia like what were they like on set versus off set?
They were good. I think the only thing, and I try, because I didn't dislike Olivia at all. I give her a lot of credit, because she is extremely talented, and she's a great actress, and she's very funny, and she has great instincts, for comedy, stuff. But, with the way we were selling her and what a lot of people believed, was that she was this super supreme geek that loves Star Wars and loves video games and loves, she's every guy's fantasy. And none of that was true. I mean, it was always, it's in her teleprompter, or it's being fed to her in her earpiece, and at one point I got a little tweaked about it because it was toward the end, right before she left. She was announcing that she had gotten the gig where she was executive producer and host on a web series about Star Wars. And I turned around to the executive producer and I said, didn't we just have to explain to her who Yoda was 2 weeks ago? And he said, I know. So sometimes it was a little frustrating, and like, people would think she was into all the gadgets and the gear and everything. And I said, there was one piece of equipment she ever cared about, and that was her BlackBerry. All she cared about. And she'd be on the whole time, like, texting with people. And, she was basically like a lot of actresses in LA. She cared about, who she was being seen with and whose party she was going to, and if she was going to stay at George Clooney's house in Lake Como, and, that kind of stuff. And was not into all the stuff they thought. And I think it bothered me because the flip side of that was Morgan Webb, where people were making assumptions that, oh, Morgan's just pretty.
Yep.
Morgan knew more about video games than anybody I've ever met. And she loved video games. And I would watch, like, cause, we'd be doing the setups and everything to get going for a day, because we'd shoot X-Play once a week when we were up at E. And we would shoot several episodes, at the same time. We shoot it all on green screen. They take it all in the post and put it together. So we're shooting all the stand-ups with it, but they would have the podium there. And then somebody would come in like, okay, well, here's the gadget of the day. It's a It's a video game controller for a console that's designed to look like an old arcade stick from like Mortal Kombat, right? And they go ahead and they're like, okay, yeah, and they put it down on the podium. And then everybody would scatter and walk away. And you would watch Morgan just kind of slowly walk over like nobody can see her. And she started playing with it, and she loved it. You know, she loved everything about games. She knew everything about games. And she never got the respect for that. In the meantime, everybody went on about Olivia and how Olivia is the real deal. But she was very talented in her own wheelhouse. You know, she was great with the acting. She was great at interviews, especially when she was interviewing other actors. And she was very funny, you know, and it was just toward the end, it got a little difficult because she wanted off the show, you know, and I got very upset because I felt that like she was getting advice from actor people she was hanging around with. And they were telling her she had to basically distance herself from everything she had done on G4 to be taken seriously as an actress. And to do that, she was disparaging the show and the producers, and she was making accusations that the show producers were perverts that made her do things. And this is where I always say that I would watch in those rehearsals, where a lot of times she would throw in something dirty to up the joke. And, you know, there's something that people who don't work in this don't understand, that a lot of times, and it's very collaborative, that people all want it to be as funny as possible, you know, in that kind of situation. And so it's everybody working together, just throwing in suggestions and saying, hey, well, what if you add this? What if you do that? And she would be right there with the best of them, yeah, saying, well, hey, let's do this. And then it'll be even funnier, you know, and the nerds will love it, you know. And she was very good at that. But now she was trying to distance herself from it. And it was turning to, oh, they made me do that. We didn't make her get on the tricycle and deep throat the hot dog. Yeah. You know, we didn't make her stuff 8 kielbasa's in her mouth. You know, it was
jump in the giant cream pie.
Right. And that whole pie thing started with her. You know, it started because it was a running gag about her and pie. You know, and she was totally game for doing the whole thing, and she loved it. That was the best day there, bar none. That was absolutely the best day there. You know, we all loved it. And yeah.
Is it? Well, I mean, I gotta, you know, looking where the culture went. I mean, she was big on a show that had come out of a time where it was okay, where being edgy was funny, and like pushing the envelope and the line was fine. And then, you know, being LA, maybe you guys were just seeing where the culture was going, where it was like, oh, you know, you deign to put yourself in that experience. You know, you're infantilizing women, you're, you know, sexualizing them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, I could see like, yeah, like people in Hollywood were like, they were aware of that kind of stuff. Ironically, Olivia Munn, post her career on a tech show, ended up doing a lot of nerd stuff anyways.
Well, yeah, because that was her brand, you know, and she knew like that was, you know, where her fan base was. And, you know, when they would bring her onto a project, obviously they want her for her acting abilities and comedic timing, but then they also want her to bring her fan base to the project as well. So, you know, and she has credibility in something like X-Men, you know, because she has all this nerd cred, you know, even though like her thing was really Wonder Woman, you know, because she was so great with that. And, you know, and then when she played the Wonder Twins with Kevin, and that was really good.
That was a funny segment.
Yeah, we used to have a lot of fun with all that kind of stuff. And even X-Play was fun during those days. Because like when I first got there in the old building, X-Play was a lot of fun because they were doing big film parodies, and they had some great writers, you know, and again, the production value was always perfect. You know, like when they did the Saw parody, it looked like that set out of Saw, and then they shot it with HD cinema cameras. So the cinematography was matched. It was perfect. And then the acting, because you had all the talent, like you had Blair Butler and Zach Selwyn, and, you know, you had all these people, you know, and Adam and Morgan. You know, the big thing that first year when I was there, at the end of the year, X-Play had a budget, and they did what a lot of people do with, you know, when they have a fixed budget, is if I don't spend all of that, I'm not getting the same amount of money next year. And they ended up at the end of the year, they had, you know, kind of squeezed their budget so much that they had over $200,000 left at the end of the year. And like, we got to spend it or we're not going to get it again next year. So they did the X-Play musical. And that was phenomenal. That was another one of those high watermarks while I was there, where it was such a big production they couldn't even set it up in our studios. They had to build a giant set out behind the parking lot and take it over because they were doing these German expressionist sets and everything that were super tall, much bigger production than normal. And everything about it was perfect. Again, they had the cinematography, the HD cinema cameras, the makeup and the hair, the wardrobe. They had the composer from Halo wrote the songs. And the thing that impressed me the most was like Adam and Morgan look like movie stars. And part of that is a credit to their acting in it, but also the way they were lit, everything. I watched the thing just going, Morgan could have been a movie star. As if she'd just gone a different direction with it. But Adam was great too. And same thing with the way they lit him, and it all just came together, and it was a lot of fun. And it was just one of the scenes you're just proud to be a part of, as opposed to a lot of the TV I had done that was disposable. We'd always say, like, a lot of these shows, whether it was the worst show we ever did or the best show we ever did, we're just going to do another one tomorrow, and everybody's going to forget about the last show. But at G4, there was always a legacy. Things lived on. It was always fun to bring up old shows and old segments. We would clip them off ourselves and keep them around. And if we got bored, we would just watch old segments of the show, or I recorded favorite bits that I always liked. And, so it was a different level of working. In fact, when we did Attack of the Dock, I told my friend Bob, who I started off, we went to high school together, and then we went to college together. He worked on a lot of my movies. And then after, he went up to Boston and went to music school, and I started Golf Channel. And then he realized music wasn't going to be a good career. People had told him, you don't want to do this. You're going to be playing hotel bars and stuff. And so he wanted to use his TV degree. And so I got him a job at Golf Channel, and then he worked his way through to be a producer. And so we did all this stuff. And then, like, I was talking to him about the documentary, and he watched it, and he said, he goes, I don't think we're ever going to see a retrospective documentary about how much people loved Golf Talk Live, which is the old interview show, which was an evergreen show. You could always go back and watch those interviews, but not like G4. That stuff that people remember, favorite bits and favorite skits, that they live on the internet. I think every Black Friday, I post one of my favorite things, which was Gadget Prawn with Matt Myra and John Barrowman from Doctor Who and Torchwood, where they took the telestrator, and every time they have one of the Black Friday ads, Matt Myra takes the telestrator and he starts drawing on it, but everything ended up looking like a phallic symbol with a scrotum sack on it, and they're losing their minds. They're laughing. He was finding new ways to make it work every time he did it. And we were just in tears by the end of the whole thing. And then at the end of it, Chris Hardwick walks in and takes a piece of gum out of Matt's mouth and puts it in his own mouth, and then he gives it to Barrowman. It was just really, really funny. And it was those last couple of months where everything went out the window because we knew we were being canceled. So we're like, who cares, right? Which was also the phase where everyone started dropping their pants for a couple of days. And that got us in a lot of trouble. But
yeah, it's younger people, like Jen, they have no idea. They have no idea what they lost. They're used to, I don't know. I feel sometimes I miss kind of like the edginess, because sometimes I feel like it went too far. But on the other hand, there's a fun camaraderie to it all, and it feels like today people are more guarded, and I don't know if I like that. I don't necessarily think that's a positive change.
Yeah, because it's really made comedy suffer. Because like I worked with Joan Rivers on and off for 15 years, and Joan's principle was always, you take the thing that makes people uncomfortable, and that's what you make the joke about, because in the discomfort they're going to laugh even harder. And so Joan would make a lot of comments that would raise eyebrows and things, and it was never malicious or mean or hurtful. It was always designed to get a laugh from that being uncomfortable, and it worked. It worked so well, and so many great big laughs. Attack of the Show very much, even X-Play, had very much their roots in like 4chan. And so there would be things that would be going on 4chan, like comedy memes and bits and running gags that would then end up on the show. And we would all know that, oh yeah, that came out of 4chan. Like the most famous one was Pedo Bear. And it's a little bit of shame because like I got some grief, online after Attack of the Dock, as though I was an apologist for this stuff. And I like, look, some of it's the way they cut it in the interview, but I wasn't apologizing for anything. I was just acknowledging the things we did then that you can't do now. But like I loved that pedo bear gag, because it was always so funny that if you didn't know what it was really about, either you're getting away with something that's super offensive and people don't realize it because they just think it's a little bear, or that you're getting them super worked up because they think it's something terrible and awful and it's just a joke, but you would never do that now. And even toward the last couple of times we did it, like at the peak, I had actually created a little keyable pedo bear, and I pitched it to them and said, what we should do today is like, I'll just keep popping it into the screen at different points, and then have them reacting to it and stuff. And it was very funny. And it actually was a throwback to a gag that I had done at Home Shopping, where I used to take, pendants, that we'd be selling.
Yeah.
And I'd put them on a black background and I would key them and then just make them keep popping in from up here. And then he pops in from over here throughout the show. And it's a recurring gag. So I did it with Pedo Bear and everybody loved it. It was hysterical. Kevin and Candace loved it. It was great. The next time we tried to do something with Pedo Bear, the 8 executive producers came downstairs and said, get that off the monitor right now. We're not allowed to do that anymore. And they said, because our feed was always going out to the E-Lobby live. And they would get super upset because in the E-Lobby, you would have celebrity guests who were waiting to be interviewed. You would have Kardashians. I walked past Kim Kardashian in that lobby. You would have business people there for sales meetings and things. And then whatever was going on in our G4 monitor would really offend them. So there was no more Pedo Bear. And then when John Barrowman was guest hosting, he did this thing where he says that this is a thing he does like on every show that he works on, or at least up until that point, where he just catches people off guard and lets his fly down and sticks his scrotum out of his fly, and makes people laugh. And he said he had done that on every show and it made people laugh. And so our stage manager Andy, was like, and we're all looking and we said, Andy, is that a prosthetic or something? Some kind of gag thing. He goes, nope, that's him. And we were like, oh, gee. So they told us, get it off there. It's going out to the lobby, and so here we're out in the E-Lobby, here's John Barrowman's nuts hanging out. That's
terrible.
And then, of course, we would love it because we were like, yeah, great. It gets everybody out there going, whoa. Yeah. But John got very upset because he got yelled at for that. And it's like, you talk about the culture shifting, where he's like, I've been doing this for years. It's never meant as a sexual thing. It's just a joke, to make people laugh. And, there were some people from the G4 side who had complained about it, but, it was never meant to be, like harassment. It was just a joke.
Yeah.
But then everything changed. And like, when they tried to take James Gunn off of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and I was on Twitter defending him, saying, look, there are jokes that he was talking about in there that we did on Attack of the Show, and James worked on Attack of the Show. So it wasn't some creepy pedophile thing. It was, just a 4chan joke.
This is kind of like the thing where this still happens even now. We're like, oh, this person said something edgy in 2014. You're like, you guys need to understand. Most people on Twitter on 2014 were just telling terrible jokes, like really graphic, lots of repeating most of them would get this video taken off YouTube, and that was just normal. But we're now holier than thou, and it's not like I loved it. Like, to me, I almost felt like if I wanted to watch Attack of the Show, and my mom comes in there, I'm like, oh, got to change the channel real quick. Can't let her see this. But I mean, it was funny and it was acceptable at the time. But now we're like, oh, the vapors, we have our fainting couches out. I feel like that's just too far in the other direction. I feel bad for John Barrowman because when he says that, like, everyone said this was so hilarious and funny, and I believed it, well, that's because they all said it was, because they actually felt it was funny. Now, it wasn't inappropriate. Yeah, probably.
Well, yeah, because it was like a locker room type humor, that I ended up, when my spine, broke apart, and that's basically my disability, in a nutshell, was, my spine, because of a disease, it fractured multiple fractures in 12 vertebrae and compressed down. So my abdomen's all squished and everything, and it's all squished and stuff. And so I was down for a year having to learn to walk again and start getting treated and everything. And so the end of 2015, I finally was cleared to try to work again, but it was going to be a little bit before I could start doing technical directing. And so I took a gig that came up. If you ever watched the show, it was a Dream Corp LLC on Adult Swim. It's a very strange show, but it's very funny. And it has John Kreese, who's, he was Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite. And he plays this mad scientist. And then like Nick Rutherford from Saturday Night Live and a bunch of other actors, are on it. And it's supposedly like this clinic where they're treating, people who have sleep problems, and the treatments end up being worse than the disease, and so in the very first episode, Nick seems to be fine. He's the new patient. He says, and they're looking, going, oh my God, I think we finally got it. We finally have a treatment that doesn't have side effects. He goes, yeah, I know, I feel great. There is one thing. And he reaches down and he pulls up his sweatpants, at a shot of his ankles, but it was actually me. And I pull up the sweatpants because they had cast for the worst ankles ever. And it specifically said in the casting list, not just fat ankles, but like medically side effect ankles, right? And so a friend of mine who's an actor, he actually, Community. You probably know Community, right?
Yep.
And the principal. And then there was like the fake version of the principal, which was JP. JP played that guy. And he was also like the mime in Eurotrip, and a bunch of other great stuff that he's been in. So he had put the casting up saying, I should break my ankles so that I can get my SAG hours for the year on this gig. And I read it and I said, oh my God, dude, that's me. And he said, go for it. I said, so we had a gag and we said, let's do this and see how far into the process I can go before they say, you know what, you're not an actor. Let's get rid of you. And I actually ended up being cast in it. And I was like, okay. So I showed up and I had to put on the sweatpants and match his wardrobe with just larger stuff for me. And pull my sweatpants up, and then you see my ankles, which are all scarred up, from issues with medications and things like that now. And it was really funny, and John's reaction was it. And, he stayed on set, which I never expected. I was a huge fan of Napoleon Dynamite. So,
I do love that movie.
And we were having a great time, and he kept calling me Errol Flynn, saying that you must be related to Errol Flynn. And we kept going. So, and the director felt bad when he heard my story because he thought I was just some extra that was cast. And I said, no, I'm actually like behind the scenes guy. I said, but I've been down for a year because my spine broke apart. This is my first day working in it over a year. He felt bad, like they were making fun of me. I was like, no, this is awesome. I was like, I was treated so well that day for just to come in for a couple of minutes and pull up a pair of sweatpants. I was treated better than I had been in 30 years of technical directing. Yeah, and I was hanging out. The assistant director was Frank Capra's grandson, and I had always seen his name in credits over the years. And he comes just up, hey, I'm Frankie, and I was like, oh. And that night I was going to ArcLight Hollywood to see It's a Wonderful Life because it was right before the holidays on the big screen with an audience, which is one of my favorite movies. So I was ecstatic. I loved everything about that gig. But that was the first thing I was able to do for a while. That I hadn't been able to do, and so. A lot of different crazy things, that we've done, with it. And that, everything's changed. It's like, I had been down, that time. And, it's like everything just kind of got more sensitive.
Yeah. It not in a very much like it seemed like the shift happened relatively quickly.
Yeah. And it happened on two fronts, both tolerance for that kind of edgy material and then people working in those environments who were now sensitive to things that, they just kind of didn't understand. I think that's where I was going with the Dream Corp story was that, like I had always had the understanding that wardrobe was very much like a fast-paced locker room type setting, that like people are just oblivious to the fact that other people are ripping their clothes off and changing, doing stuff because, there's a fast change. Okay, you got to get changed for the next scene. Boom, let's go. Here's your clothes, go. And it was very much like a factory, and that everybody was understood. So I go in and I'm talking to the wardrobe girl and she's giving me the clothes and doing all things. She said, well, okay, you can go ahead and change here. And she meant, I guess, the bathroom next door But she said here, she said, or if you want to go, someplace you can do it. And I was like, yeah, no, fine, I'll just change here. I had also spent a year going to doctor's offices where they introduced themselves and immediately told me to take my clothes off. So I had no shame anymore. And so I just went ahead and started changing, and I had black shorts on underneath, so it wasn't a big, thing. But she just kind of reacted by going, oh, I guess we're doing this here. I was like, well, that's what you told me to do. So, but I just didn't think about it because I thought, well, this is what they do in the wardrobe. Everybody's quick, go, go, go. And, but now people are super sensitive.
Yeah. Does it drive you crazy? Because I know I see this all the time on Twitter because I see these people who are, how do I going to put this? I'm trying to be very nice. Who are culture warriors. Okay. Usually more on one side than the other, but they're very much in the culture war. And then they'll admit every now and then they'll say, well, I was just, I was feeling kind of sad, nostalgic. So I need something to cheer me up. So I was watching X-Play last night, or I was looking for old things of Attack the Show. So obviously there are these people that actually enjoy it, but there is this performativeness. You mentioned John Barrowman and Doctor Who with Torchwood. That's another one that usually gets hit by this. So also there is this performativeness that we have to pretend that all this stuff was terrible and bad. Does that bother you? Because I felt like talking to Chris Gore, even talking to Sessler, there is this sense like you're almost not supposed to be proud of what you did, which does seem wrong to me.
It's like you're supposed to be ashamed of it, and be apologetic for it. I think that was why it was so weird when like all of a sudden a bunch of us who had been interviewed for Attack of the Dock were suddenly being criticized as apologists, for what we had done. And nobody was being an apologist for what we had done. I think the most you got was Casey Schreiner saying, yes, in retrospect, it's probably good that we don't do some of those things now, but he wasn't apologizing for what we did. None of us did. And we were all very proud. The only thing I ever took issue with was the fat suits gag. And that was because that was a period of time where Kevin and Olivia had been regularly making these really mean, just mean-spirited, nasty, malicious, jokes about heavy people. And, I'm on board for anything, no matter how personal it may be, if it's funny. And this wasn't funny. This was always mean-spirited and hateful and ha, 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 you're fat and we're not. And it was like, they were doing it to our audience. And I'm like, have you been to Comic-Con? Have you not seen our audience?
Go to any of our conventions.
Yeah. So, when they announced that they were going to do Revenge of the Fatties, and it was going to be the fat suits. And I think these were the guys who had done like Nutty Professor and stuff. And, and again, the art craft of it was amazing. I mean, I looked at it and said, this looks really, really good. And this is going to be fun because it was pitched as something where Kevin and Olivia are now going to find out what it's like to be subjected to that kind of ridicule. Basically it's going to be turned on them. They're going to learn what it's like to have to try to have mobility, when you have to carry all that extra weight and do this stuff. And instead, all they did was turn it into more vicious than they had even done before. And now playing to tropes and stereotypes. And I still was there for like half of it, where I was, because when they had them riding on a tricycle, the tricycles, and then they come around and Kevin suddenly gets distracted because there was a beautiful girl who was a producer on the show The Dish for Style Network. And she loved hanging around with Attack of the Show people. So they put her in the shot as the beautiful girl, and Kevin wheels up to her and takes a piece of pizza from her. And now he's trying to ride the tricycle while he's eating the pizza. And that was very funny. The funniest bit was at the end of the race, Olivia wins. And there was this long driveway that went from the parking garages at the back of the E buildings out to Wilshire Boulevard. And it was a very long driveway. Olivia goes through the finish line. Chris Gore is standing there, congratulating her, and she just keeps going. And the camera follows, and she just keeps riding all the way down to Wilshire. And it was funny, there were bits about it. But then a lot of it was just so hateful, that partway through the show, our production manager, who came from the E side, not the G4 side, had threatened to quit over it, because it was very personal for her. And one of the executives finally came down and said, you can finish this bit today, And then all of this footage goes into the vault and basically never seen again on this network. And the only reason that ever came out again was because we knew we were being canceled. They were doing the best of shows, and they included it in some of the best of stuff because they figured, what are they going to do? Cancel us? we're almost out anyway. So they did bring it back for that, but that was the only thing I ever really objected to or felt bad about what we did. And I was right. A lot of the fans were furious about it. It wasn't something that got a reaction, that everybody, could appreciate. It was more seen as a big slap in the face to the audience, and also just ridicule to people that are, that are heavy. So,
one of the cool things about Attack of the Doc is how much archival footage, how just access to all those episodes, because, and this is true even when I've done research on G4TV and looking into this stuff, it's very hard to locate old episodes of G4TV content, whether that's X-Play or Attack of the Show. There's this YouTuber who is working very diligently to catalog as much as he possibly can. So to the person who runs his account, good for you. But
yeah,
is there some reason why that Comcast just will not let this stuff out? Is it because they don't think there's any money in it? Is it because it's kind of offensive? Is it a copyright issue? What's going on there?
If I had to guess, I would say that, the contracts that they had with people, to appear on camera for some of that stuff was probably, in order to save money, was probably restricted to, just the live show and rebroadcasts on G4. So to put them in other places may not have been allowed, or I couldn't understand when G4 came back why Comcast wasn't dedicating a block of programming to running these old episodes, because everybody had been asking for it. It would be a great way to do it. E had done it before when they acquired all of the Late Night with David Letterman, and they had been running them at 8:00 at night. And you could just watch all these old episodes of Letterman. So I don't know why they didn't do it, but that would probably be my best guess, is that, a lot of times, I think that was part of the reason that when Attack of the Show was canceled, and then we shut down production on X-Play as well, but for the next 2 years, X-Play kept running reruns. So we got to the end of 2014 and they were still running. Guess what? The new iPhone 6 or whatever, is going to be the greatest thing ever. And we're like, yeah, that was 2 years ago. But they were allowed to keep rerunning X-Play, but they were not allowed to keep rerunning Attack of the Show. And whatever was going on with that was probably also why, it hasn't been available anywhere. I think the guy who's been archiving everything and making it available, because of this new legal ruling, I think he's afraid that they're going to start tearing it all down there and taking it off. But why? Who does it matter to anymore?
Some people are watching it. A few of them have decent view counts, so there are people who are checking this out.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, who from the business standpoint?
Yeah,
who from the ownership standpoint?
I know what you meant, but
why do they care? They're not losing it. People are just enjoying the shows here.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of bad business decisions that happened with the new G4TV, that could fill a book. But I feel bad. I feel bad for you guys. I feel super bad for Kevin Pereira. I really do. I viscerally feel very sad for that man, because you could just tell watching the show, he loved Attack of the Show so much. He came back for the new thing. I mean, he gave it his all, and he still got swat down. I feel bad for that guy.
Well, yeah, and he didn't leave in 2012 because, he was burned out and wanted to go do other stuff. He left because he just wanted more input on the show, and they shocked him. This was the same time they fired Adam, and just said, yeah, no, okay, so we're not going to renew your contract. And he was just blindsided by it. Yeah. And, it's an opportunity to go and explore other things, but he loved being part of that show. And, Adam, it was a little bit different with Adam and Morgan. It was a different climate. Once we got up to the E building, I felt like they always felt like they were the stepchildren, kind of thing.
Yeah. Sessler made this point that he kind of almost divides his time at G4 was old building, new building. When it was that old building, you could get away with a whole lot, do all kinds of interesting stuff. When he got to new building, they were like, got the ruler right there to swat you.
Yeah, because like in the old building, they not only had their own set and they had their own big sound stage, but they also had like a flex studio where they would always have their film parodies and stuff going on. There were special things going on. And so they had this huge footprint in there, with these big sets and everything. And here they had done the musical with giant sets in the parking lot, all this stuff. And now we went up to E, which was already a small closet studio. It was basically the closet studio with the green screen where they would shoot the soup. And they kind of pulled that all out and now put Attack of the Show and X-Play. And initially X-Play just had a corner of that studio, with a fraction of the set they had had. So, they already felt like, oh, we're not that important, and they'd also had a shift where they had lost a lot of the great writers that they had, who were really funny, who have gone on to huge things. And all that went away. They had been told no more of the big production, numbers and things. So suddenly that show wasn't as much fun to work on for everybody. And they resented the fact that everyone still loved Attack of the Show, but they felt like everyone's just really here for Attack of the Show, and then they have to do our show. So they felt like with the crew and that okay, we'll get X-Play done. But that was a little tricky. I mean, a lot of us liked them, and liked doing the show too. It was just that, once the attitude started to go downhill, it wasn't as much fun for us all to work on. And when they tried to make it like a 5-day-a-week show, 1 hour a day, it just got off to a horrible start. They were supposed to have all their graphics loaded in before Christmas that year. And then when we came back, we'd have everything built and we'd start the rehearsals. And we walked in that day coming off the holidays to find out they hadn't loaded in anything. They were 2 weeks behind schedule, but they still expected to start rehearsals that day. And I just looked at the new production manager, the line producer. I just looked at her and said, "You're insane. We're not doing anything today. We're going to spend today loading in all this stuff that you were supposed to do 2 weeks ago." And so we got off to kind of a rough start. And then like somebody baked chocolate chip cookies for all of them, with really thick, chocolate chunks. And first did not share anything with any of the crew. And then that upset a lot of people. But then one of the producers had gotten this thick chocolate all over his fingers and got it into the headset panel. And since I had started there, I kept a Halloween pumpkin that I always brought in and kept it stocked with candy for everybody. So immediately the engineering started yelling at me like it was my fault that it was the Halloween candy. I said, well, no. I said, because look at the chocolate. That's not even in my bucket, and everybody's always been good about it. And then eventually somebody fessed up and said, I think it was the cookies that I brought in. But that whole thing just got everybody off to a bad start. So, and there was a new director for X-Play too, which that didn't work. Well, because we had had a fill-in director who I had started off with years before, Alan Wu, who had come from the Soup and Talk Soup back in the heyday of Talk Soup, when like the crew were characters on the show. And Alan would always be the guy with the really thick Coke bottle glasses. And, he would do a lot of really funny stuff. And he had been filling in as director on some of the G4 shows, especially X-Play. Now they needed to hire a full-time director, and they didn't hire him. They didn't make his deal. And so they hired somebody else who had been out of TV for like 5 years, and he was a news guy. He wasn't an entertainment guy. He didn't play video games. He didn't know anything. And he came in and got off to a really rough start with the crew by throwing them under the bus for something. It was a bad situation. So at that point, everybody hated X-Play. And but then they scrapped the 1 hour thing. They scrapped the 5 days a week thing. They put them on a green screen and then would just tape all their stuff in one day, so it was a little easier to do, but by then it just wasn't as fun. They were very disorganized, and they would spend a lot of time trying to make up for the disorganization by not letting the crew go to the bathroom. Then that was a running thing for several years. In fact, because I got involved in that, I think that kept me from going back to New G4. Because that had ramifications all the way down, because simply they just didn't want to give the crew 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, and it was because they mismanaged their time. And, so it wasn't as much fun to work, as it had been at the old building. The old building was a lot of fun, just as much fun as Attack of the Show. But Attack was still fun. There was like a little period of time between when Kevin left and when the show was announced that it was being canceled. That wasn't a lot of fun because they were trying a lot of things that didn't work, and they were trying to be more of what eventually became Esquire Network. And it was just bad, and people were very upset because we were constant rumors that we were going to be canceled. And then when it finally was announced, that was some of the most fun we ever had. Because nobody had anything to lose, and so we would just have a good time. We would try the craziest, most offensive things we could do. And we got away with everything until the pants dropping thing got out of control. Then management said, if one more person drops their pants, you're going to get canceled immediately. No rap show, no best of show, no rap party. So we had to stop that. But for a couple of days, it was nuts. They were trying to one up each other.
I think for me, by the time when Kevin Pereira was gone, I was like, okay, so this is done. And I think to a lot of people, it seemed like, that this G4TV thing, it's going to come to an end. Remember, this is like when streamers are, from my perspective, this is like when Netflix is getting big, Hulu's now happening, the Switch is happening, and it's like, well, how does, a daily TV network fit into this new media ecosystem?
Yeah. And, I think it had started, when Olivia left. Because, that it was the chemistry between the two of them that really made the show. But I think, and I even mentioned this in the documentary, that, we had always said that, they could replace Olivia if they had to. But Kevin was really the heart of the show. And if he was to leave, then we'd be canceled, because you couldn't find one person who could do all the things he could do so well. And just also be so in tune with the culture, with it. And then after years and years and years of waiting, I got a house. I put all my money into the house thinking, okay, I'm going to finally take this plunge and do this. And then that was on a Friday, and on Monday, while I was out doing a school thing, Kevin announced that he was leaving. I was like, oh, you're kidding. I just put all my money into the house. I'm done. But it looked like for a little while we were going to keep going. But when Olivia was gone, and then Candace came in, and Candace is like the nicest, sweetest person. It was just a bad fit, mainly because Olivia was so good at playing blue and just, going wherever she had to go to make the joke work. And she could hold her own with Kevin, like a couple of volleyball players. They would just be, batting the offensive jokes back and forth and one-upping each other. And they could do that. And Candace couldn't do that, because Candace's go-to was always Kevin, I'm the sweet, innocent virgin, and it didn't work, because it would leave him sitting there like his joke just falls flat now because she didn't have the response to it. And, that's when everything really started to, kind of unravel. And they started tinkering with the format and saying, we want it to be more men's liqueurs and fine fashion. And I was like, dude, again, audience right here, jeans and a t-shirt and, or cargo shorts, doesn't care about fashion, doesn't care about fine liqueurs, doesn't drink, just give me video games and geek culture, and, kind of outrageous comedy. Yeah.
It was a bad fit. The whole concept with Esquire, it just wasn't going to work.
But that's why it was beautiful when it failed. I mean, I felt bad because some people did get to stay on and work Esquire Network. So I felt bad for them when it went away and now they were all unemployed, just like we were. But still, it was fitting, to see it go because, it was just crazy the way the whole thing happened. And then even like in the documentary, they kind of played with the time a little bit, but, they made it sound like G4 went under and then, Esquire came right out of that, but it actually didn't. G4 just kept lingering in limbo for 2 years. And then when they did go to launch Esquire 2 weeks before, they suddenly changed it so that they were going to kill Style Network and then make that Esquire channel because they said, why have two fashion channels? So we all got hopeful, like, oh, maybe they're going to bring back G4, but then that went away. And then they just killed the channel altogether. And I was getting emails the last night because my friend Brian worked in the master control and he was sending me messages with like the log sheets for that night that just had like G4 on it and then said like off air, after like 9 o'clock Western time, Pacific Coast time. And, it's just sad.
You former G4TV production people, all the former employees, you guys are like beaten dogs. Your hopes keep getting put up, ripped away.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm sorry, the day that they announced that it was coming back, during COVID, and everybody was so excited, and I had people all over the place asking me, how can I get in, and do it? I'm like, hey, I haven't been rehired yet. Don't get too excited. I said, I don't even know if I'm going back. So, but I did have talks with them. It was just, I think it was about 6 weeks before they relaunched, and we were talking, and I had already started my disability stuff. So at that point, I didn't even know if I'd be able to go back. I didn't know if I'd be able to handle it. But I said, let's see how far this goes. Let's see how serious they get about me coming back, and then I can make a decision, if I think I can try it or not. But I had the interview and I talked with them, and there were some really interesting things they talked about that sounded good that they killed by the time they relaunched. And then the fact that like they didn't have a crew, they didn't know which shows were coming back. They didn't know what the schedule was going to be. There was just, it just was very disorganized. And, they wasted my time, like 3 weeks, without telling me that, we don't plan to bring you back, and instead they were going to hire a guy who had no experience as a technical director. It's one of the most critical positions on the show. And it wasn't as critical as when I did it because they weren't expecting the technical director to come up with all the magic the way I had to. They were going to have the graphics designers do a lot of it, but they didn't have graphics designers either. They didn't have a sound guy. They didn't have, and the assistant director, the director's the stage manager, because the director was not going to have an assistant director. The director was going to be doing both jobs. And the stage manager, along with the technical director, is one of the most critical, people to the director under those circumstances, had no assistant directing experience. So you had the TD and the stage manager both had no idea what they were doing. And, so I was hearing all these stories from the inside as it was going. And like, they were supposed to be doing rehearsals. They didn't have a crew, so they couldn't get people to take the jobs. And everybody I talked to said when they talked to them, the rates were insulting. That was the one word that kept coming up over and over again. And then because they couldn't book a crew, the E-Network loaned them a bunch of their staffers to help get them through the launch because they could pay freelancers a decent rate at E. So they just shifted other people over to G4 to help get it launched. And then I was just still hearing the nightmare stories from inside, and I watched that relaunch special where it was like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, that was bad.
Well, I'd been told the plan was to do one attack of the show a week, and that it would be 3 hours. And so in my mind, they were going to do like 3 attack of the shows just in one day. And then, they could re-air it over a long period of time. But instead, they took about 20 minutes or half an hour of attack of the show and stretched it out over a 3-hour period. I was like, no, this isn't going to work. Now, you can't have an hour and a half version of Around the Net. What the hell are they thinking? And then I kind of tuned it out for a while. But then Chris Gore told me about the Frost stuff. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? And they said, oh, yeah, you got to go on YouTube and look it up. So I got caught up on what happened there. And which I think I mentioned to you, before in emails. I thought you did a great job with the interview with her, because it was a tough, position. Like on the one hand, she was absolutely being scapegoated, for the whole thing. I saw enough mismanagement in the beginning that regardless of who Frost was, it was going to fail. It wasn't going to work. Like the people they had put in the production staff and the people even some of the executive producers, when the director came in for his first day, they were all coming up to him saying, oh, thank God you're here. Because none of us know what we're doing, including like the management, the executive producers. They were all counting on Genji to teach them how to do TV. And that was frightening to hear that. So I knew even back then it was going to be bad. And the Frost thing, I did have serious issues with what she did, but it didn't cause the downfall of G4.
Yeah, I agree.
My issues with her was just more when it was restarting. I was fearful for what they were going to do to our legacy, because there was a lot of love and fandom. Anybody I ever came across that I said I had worked at G4 just went crazy. It's about how much they loved G4. They loved Attack of the Show. They loved X-Play. They loved Kevin and Olivia and Morgan and Adam. And, it was like people felt like it was something very precious to them that had been taken away too soon. And I felt that if they did it wrong, they were going to tarnish that legacy. Because I had come across that with movies that I loved as a kid. And when I went back and rewatched them as an adult, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't as great as I thought it was. And when Frost did what she did out of anger and resentment, a lot of those fans started saying, you know what, maybe Attack of the Show wasn't as cool as I thought it was. And I was like, now I was mad. I'm like, now you did the one thing I didn't want you to do, which was ruin our legacy, which is all we had, really,
No, I don't disagree, because I think the discussions that we both saw, many people saw online in the news, definitely that did seem to be happening. But she was in like a really, like, I've thought about this a lot and talking with people. You're right. Like, on one level, incompetence, like just the sheer incompetence. But I think even if they had their ducks in the row, the idea that they were going to base their new network on esports, and no one has been able to get this to work. Many different people, I just did an interview that's coming up on the show with Gene Park, and when he was brought into the Washington Post 2018, it was because they needed someone for esports. So people have been trying to make esports happen, because MMA was, people may not know this, in the 2010s, MMA became really big, and everyone in media scoffed. Like, it's MMA. People punching each other without the gloves. It's animals. No one's going to be into that. Well, MMA got really big. And so then they're like, oh, esports can be big. It's going to be the next MMA. Let's jump on board. But esports, they've never been able to get to work. Whether it was the people who are putting together these tournaments, they almost always lose money, or the people who try to cover in the media, it just doesn't click. So I don't think that making esports focused G4 TV would have worked, especially when, like Frost says in the interview, like, okay, so they want us to do an esports show, but we're not allowed to show footage of esports. That does make it a little difficult. It's such a giant giant clusterfuck. And it's really sad, because it goes back, like I said, Kevin Pereira, that dude, he had tried to move heaven and earth to make G4 TV again a thing. He had everything going on with YouTube and the botting, and I mean, he had really, 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 really tried, and it didn't happen.
Well, also, because he was kind of the face of G4, between the two channels, he was the face of the whole thing. And, so when it goes bad, obviously he feels very self-conscious about that, like it's a reflection on him, and, but he had no control over it, that whole, Frost thing. I mean, like, I knew all about that. Like, as soon as I got caught up to speed on what had happened, I had people on the inside telling me what had happened. And like the night of the layoffs, that was the day she posted up the picture with the gecko, and the cigarette with the crown, and said, "I survived."
It's kind of funny, but it was bad timing.
Yeah, it was just tone deaf, because like I totally got right away what she was doing. She wasn't making fun of the people who got laid off. She was making fun of the people that hate her, and would expect her to get laid off. But it was tone deaf to do that with all the people who just got laid off. But that night I got a call from somebody on the inside who told me the whole story there. And they said, first of all, that whole bit, with the sexism in gaming, that was her and two of the producers, that basically said, we need to kind of shake things up. We need the fans all riled up. And this was something that they had apparently done in esports, where offend the audience and then get them all paying attention and watching the show, and you build the audience, which was a horrible idea, because that may have worked in that esports. But any of us who had worked at G4, who used to spend time on the forums, and of course, before YouTube and all those, the G4 forums was where you got all your feedback. And I would be in there all the time under a fake ID, and listening to stuff, because sometimes they'd get upset about something and they'd start throwing accusations at somebody on the show. And I would be like, well, I've worked in television a long time. I can't say specifically, but this is kind of how this would normally work. So, like the infamous Halo 3 trailer debacle at E3, where there was such a buildup to the Halo 3 trailer, and we get to it in the Microsoft press conference, and then like 30 seconds in, we get told to go to commercial break. And I think Adam talked about it in your interview. I told the whole story for Attack of the Dock, and it got cut. And I think I know why it got cut. And I heard the other side of the story for the first time in the extended interviews from somebody who was involved in that, where I did understand now there was a whole other side to that story, as to why they had to go to commercial break. There were contractual obligations, there was legal stuff. We had to go to break there. But being in the control room for that, when they're telling Adam, you've got to go to break, and Adam is screaming, I am not going to break. You're not going to break. This is going to be an embarrassment. This is going to, and then the producer, who had kind of a high-pitched voice when he got upset, or the executive, and he's screaming back because he felt now he was being challenged. That, in the end, Adam's a host. He's the executive. He's saying, go to break. You got to go to break. And so the two of them are screaming at each other, from the control room out to the Microsoft press conference, and it's all, just tell him to shut up and go to break. And it's going on, and we're sitting in the control room like, oh man, what's going on? And then we had a fill-in director who came from E! News, because our director, Genji, was out on site doing the Ubisoft press conference. So Fred was filling in from the E! Side, and he just agreed to do it to help out, and thought it would be fun. And now all of a sudden they were giving death threats on the G4 forums. They not only should be fired, should be killed. And so I'm going in there saying, well, as someone who's worked in television for a long time, that would not typically be the director's call. That would be someone in ad sales or an executive. I kept stressing it, and doing it. So, that was a really rough day.
Internet hates that. In my experience, internet hates when the actual person with the information, like they were there, and they're like, they don't like that. They don't like that. The internet likes many things, but they don't actually like people who are like there who can tell the truth. Maybe because it's less interesting, or I don't know.
Well, I think usually I was able to diffuse it because I pretended to be someone who was just a fan who, didn't know the specifics of what went on. I just knew that that's not typically how it worked. But I also didn't want them to kill Fred. I'm saying the poor guy's just filling in, and he's like, what the hell happened? Am I going to get fired now because of this? So, but that was those experience with those forums. I could have told them that idea that, hey, we're going to piss off the audience with this sexism and gaming thing was not going to work, and it would never be forgiven. And the three, between the three of them, they did a bunch of things there that I found out over time just were bad like that. And, were some of the most cringeworthy moments on New G4. And it was really just down to them, just not knowing what they were doing and their own egos and stuff like that. But when they did the layoffs, I got the call that night, and they told me that that's where that came from. It wasn't a legitimate, she wanted to fight for the rights of women, or it was totally, we're going to shake things up and piss off the audience. That's going to get us ratings. Then when they realized quickly how bad it had gone, and they knew the company was going to fail anyway, because they had no idea how to save it. And they decided, we're going to keep her on so that we can blame her when it fails. Because I kept saying, why are they not letting her go? It's just one thing after another. You could diffuse this whole thing with the fans if you did let her go. And she has earned it. She had messed up enough times with things she said. I was like, it's probably just a good idea that she stopped tweeting, just stop, and they said they're keeping her on so they can blame her when it all fails. I was like, oh, well, that's great, and I think it was a week later that was a Thursday, I think, and then they laid her off on Monday. So, because now the company was getting flack for, this person's so terrible and awful, why are you keeping her on? And they couldn't hide it anymore, so they just went ahead and let her go. But, but she certainly, because she kept playing tough with her responses to all the criticism. But, then it clearly was getting to And that was confirmed when you talked to her. I mean, it felt bad to hear, how much of an impact it had.
Yeah, I mean, she's only human. I mean, look,
Yeah.
that's just part of it. Like they say on YouTube, don't check the comments, but you still have to engage. I think any of that stuff, it just wears on you. Even the toughest person just wears on you.
No, and I said, look, you got to toughen up a little bit. I have a YouTube channel where I almost never appear on camera. I'm always represented by a Bitmoji, and I get criticism, and I get trolls, I get stuff,
Yeah, people just are not very nice online. Just me.
Oh, it's being anonymous, it's like you can just be a bully, and say stuff. At least, like when I criticized her in interviews and things, I own, and I said, this is where it's coming from. Sometimes it was very justified. I mean, when she's had that quote that, and again, I understood she was quoting a directive that was given to them supposedly by somebody in management. It wasn't her saying it directly, but it still, set me off. It set a bunch of people off, saying that your job is to correct the mistakes of the past. And I was like, you gotta be kidding. You guys are the ones that can't figure out how to put a show together. We lasted 13 years, launched a bunch of superstar careers, and, we have this, beloved legacy. We had to be corrected. But it goes back to that shift in the culture where, it was viewed that, like our past was something to be embarrassed of. And it wasn't. I'm still proud of everything, except the fat suits. I'm proud of everything we did on G4. Yeah. And it was definitely like the best job ever. And I felt very lucky that, because there are people who do TV, tech career positions who never get to work in a format that they love. They spend their whole career in sports and don't like sports. They spend their career working on fashion shows or something. They don't like fashion stuff. And for those years, I got to be part of just this crazy chaos that I loved because it was everything that I'm into. With a bunch of other people who love it too. And who also were supremely creative and talented people who worked their asses off, to make those shows much more. I mean, if you looked at the numbers for what G4 paid people, for how much money they made, how much they budgeted for the shows, the fact that we pulled off so much, as that we did was a real tribute to how much everyone went above and beyond, like it was not unusual for people to kick in 130, 140%. Because everybody wanted to honor each other's work, and it was great. And that element was there in the new G4. They all obviously were being supportive of each other, and they were talented people, even though a lot of them were not a good fit for G4. I think they were people who are very good in like a solo setting, or just working with one person, or maybe in a small group, but not that kind of a setting. It just didn't work, and they were too focused on themselves, and because that's normally how they would conduct their Twitch show or their YouTube podcast. It's all about them. Well, you can't do that on that. Like what the best of Attack of the Show was always that push and pull with Kevin and Olivia, and how they played off each other, the chemistry between the two. And I felt that they never really had that with anybody, there, even though you had people who were very good at certain things, but they also wasted a lot of people too. I've had some quotes in the interviews where I talked about the fact that they just wasted so many of those people who were very good at different things. And then you just had them sitting on a couch the whole time. And a bunch of them, they looked bored. They didn't look like they knew what they were supposed to be doing, and so I felt bad, for that, especially for the ones that were very funny and very talented, and, and even the Frost, thing, because I knew she was getting more grief for that than she really should have gotten.
You have a history in TV production. You've worked with these networks. You know what they're like. Okay, so here's my thing. When researching this, I could get a lot of people to talk to me anonymously. Many people were very happy to leak. That wasn't a problem. The problem is getting people on the record. It seems, and so many people have said, this is only a part of what I can tell you, but there are much worse problems here. Frost even alludes to it in our interview. It's hard to get specifics on what they are, because Frost thought that they were actually going to get in trouble for like something like really bad, like maybe criminal, but I can't seem to get a hard read on what that is. And there seems to be no interest, as far as I can tell, from the media, from the other companies, from the people that formerly worked there to dive further or to hold anyone accountable. Is there something about these companies, because you've worked at them, that they're just so slimy and slick and they just slither right through? It's like they're coated in butter.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's ever going to be like, where did all this money go? Like, what happened here? Like, there seems to be some iffy things going on. Maybe something needs to be investigated, but I don't think, I hate to use this term, justice for G4, but I don't think there ever will be, at least for new G4.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is, the companies are vindictive, and speaking out scares a lot of people, and especially a lot of those people who had come from like the streaming world, and this was their first foray into like big media world, and they're looking at it, hey, if I speak out publicly, they're going to end my career and blacklist me. And we ran into the same thing with Attack of the Dock. We thought it was all going to be just a good nostalgia trip, and people would love to come and talk and be part of it. And then suddenly we're finding out that everybody was telling Chris no, or wasn't responding. And I even reached out to some of the technical crew people and thought, well, they'll do it, and not even responses, because they were all afraid that it would get them blacklisted with Comcast or blacklisted with NBC Universal. A bunch of them were hoping to eventually, at least freelance back for new G4. I think because there was so much love for it, everyone no one wanted to take a chance risking getting involved in it. And I didn't mind speaking out, like with the documentary, because like when we did the interview with Chris, at that point we had been told, because of COVID and everything, that my particular subunit of the red carpet shows was eliminated. And the agreement between me and the director and the graphics operator who were part of that unit was that once something like that goes away and they cut that out of the budget, they don't ever bring it back. So we assumed that we were done. And that was my last gig that I still had. So I thought, well, I'm retiring as soon as I'm on disability. I can speak out because I don't care. I don't, I can actually be honest and just say what's going on and spill the tea, if you will,
Yeah.
But, and I just wanted it because like, we knew that was one thing about the documentary, was that it had to be, kind of sensitive a little bit to, trying to not, like he had to be very, very careful about anything that could get him sued, accusations of things. So, but at the same time, we wanted to tell the real story of what happened, and fans wanted the real story about what happened, and I knew, well, no one else is going to say it. I'll say it. Yeah. And just say, these were my observations of why G4 went under. Here was the process, how it happened. Here was how we lacked support. And, here was some of the behind the scenes stuff. But even then, they cut some of my things down, or like I told the same story that I told you about Olivia kind of bad mouthing the show on the way out, the way that sat badly with a lot of people, and, the way she left. But in the documentary, they cut it up to make it sound like I was just nothing but complimentary toward Olivia. And I was like, so, I mean, there were a lot of sensitivities like that, and then a lot of people who were afraid to speak out. Somehow it got through all the old G4 people that don't participate in this thing. And there was a little bit of it there where that core group of the producers that were friends with Kevin, because it didn't come from Kevin, it wasn't a Kevin project, like they weren't going to support it, and be part of it. And it was like a cliquey thing that always happened like that little group would always separate itself out from the rest of us. And that was a little bit of it, because Chris tried really hard to get like Kevin and Olivia. Olivia even took it off her IMDb, even though it was just archive footage. And so she wasn't going to participate in it. And Kevin, they kept trying and trying. I even tried, and it was just nothing. And the best we got was somebody saying, because it's not a Kevin thing, we're not going to support it. I ended up, the executive producers emailed me and asked me where I had gotten a bunch of the footage. And I explained it. And what had happened was in the last few days before we shut down, we had archived all of this funny stuff over the years, and like our favorite bits and just funny outtakes and bloopers. And we had that all in the digital server system. And so John Espy, who was the tape op, he was there. And then I had a ton of funny still moments that I had grabbed that I had stored in the switcher. And then Heather, the graphics operator, she would grab funny freezes or make funny titles for things. And so the three of us spent the last few days just archiving all that stuff. And so I had all of it, and I just kept telling Chris, look, if you just let me get my stuff back, I'm telling you, there's gold in there, right? Plus I had shot a bunch of digital cinema footage that, if you see in the movie, like a bunch of digital cinema footage of the building, that Wilshire area, the courtyard, the studios, some of the people working. I shot all that with my digital cinema camera as an experiment. Thought that's all it was ever going to be, but I was like, oh, this will be perfect for the documentary. And then I had shot a bunch of mini DV footage behind the scenes because I was doing a thing for a friend's high school program in Wyoming. And they had me come up to talk about careers in television. And so I shot like a day of behind the scenes on Attack of the Show. And the kids loved it, and that's great, but it was perfect for the documentary. So I had all this great stuff. So the executive producers, emailed me and asked me where I had gotten all that footage and how did Chris get all that footage. And so when I went through it, I asked them, well, did you guys like the documentary? We watched a little bit of it, but we haven't finished it. Like it's 88 minutes. You don't have time to finish it. They didn't watch it because they weren't being supportive of it. And it's that clicky thing again, because, it came from Chris and a bunch of us who were considered outside the group, I guess, that they weren't real supportive. So a lot of them didn't participate in the interviews. I thought the interviews we got were great, and I kept telling Chris, because I think he was very sensitive to the fact that, hey, we don't have the hosts. I said, you can get that anywhere. You can get tons of that stuff online, and they're not going to say anything that's going to, be titillating. They're not going to tell any stories. They're going to be very complimentary to their co-hosts and producers. And I said, I think this is kind of cool because you're getting a lot of stories that they never would have heard about the behind the scenes experience, putting this together, and how much we all loved, working there, being a part of it. So I think that was part of it. But as far as the new G4, I think I don't know if they actually were under NDAs. That's what I was hearing a lot when it went under, that they couldn't talk because they were under NDAs.
That's what I was told over and over again, that they had pretty strict NDAs.
Right. But then I guess once it all liquidated and was gone, I guess they were no longer subject to the NDAs, because then in their own podcasts, then they did start talking about stuff that was going on.
I have to look at it, but I think one person explained that the organization was so incompetent that they had set up for NDAs, but they improperly filed them.
Oh God!
And so some people were able to sneak through.
Okay.
I'd have to find it. Someone sent me an email about it.
So they had loopholes that they were able to get out.
Yeah, not intentional.
Some of them did talk, a lot about what had been going on and about the mismanagement and how, they were promised one operating structure coming in, and then it all went out the window. But the thing I kept asking that, again, nobody else was asking, and you just brought it up, was where did the money go? Because they had a lot of money to start up with. And yes, they pissed away a lot of money on that studio that they never should have spent. But it doesn't account for where all that money went. They should have had a couple of years worth of runway to start with. Because typically a cable channel would start up with 2 to 3 years of runway. Like Golf Channel, we started up with 2 years. And we were good no matter what, but then Fox Sports, I think we started up with 2 years of runway, and then it was still going until like 2001. So, there was money there. Now things typically now don't do that. When we started up Revolt TV, which was Sean Diddy's music channel, that didn't age well. I had to show him how to work the switcher, because the publicity, they wanted to take pictures of him at the switcher, because the switcher is always like the coolest looking piece of equipment in the studio. And so they all want to take a picture at it, like they're operating and pushing the buttons and doing this. And so I had to show him how to do it. And, now all this creepy stuff's coming out, like, but on the day it was cool, because everybody kept putting the fear of God in you about him. Don't look at him. Don't talk to him. And he just walked up. He's like, "Hey, I'm Sean." I was like, "Hey, I'm Chris." I mean, it was just, he was a very cool. So I guess I'm lucky he didn't hit on me. I don't know. Because I'm hearing these horror stories. But so we did that and showed him how to work it. And, but they didn't have a year's worth of startup. I think it was 6 months in, they were laying people off, cutting down shows, and and I was part of Caffeine, which was supposed to be like another Twitch, and it was a bunch of G4 people, and Attack of the Show people, and that's why I went in, and we were doing like a live Dungeons and Dragons show, and we had a cool, which again was Mike Shaw, it was a cool like virtual reality animated comedy show set in space with Amy Vorpal, and that was a lot of fun. We did that, but they quickly pivoted from the idea of we're going to do live programming for this Twitch type channel to just basically covering people playing video games. And then they ended up canceling all the live programming, they were cutting budgets, trying to do everything super tight. They didn't have the runway. And G4 clearly didn't, but based on the numbers I heard, they could have survived easily 2 years, which would have given them time to tweak the programming, say, okay, this isn't working, that's working. Big thing with Golf Channel was Arnold Palmer had insisted, at the beginning, that it was to be a pay channel and there were no advertising on it. And they kept saying, that's not going to work. And 6 months in, the numbers were horrible. And even though we had the runway, we were still in danger of getting canceled because, channels weren't willing to add a pay channel. They were willing to add a basic tier channel, but not another pay channel. And so 6 months in, we made a major pivot, and there were a bunch of layoffs and stuff. But that was when my job changed from, instead of being a graphics operator, I became the guy who had to run the whole building. Yeah, that was a pretty crazy job, but they changed it all. So now it was a basic tier channel with advertising, and so we had the time to make that kind of change. G4 not only didn't seem to know how to make those changes, but they also didn't have the time to experiment. They could have tried different things, tried different combinations of hosts, and all they were doing was just cutting and cutting. So when they made the big changes like XPlay, all they do is just change the format, scrap it down to basically a podcast, and just have 5 people sitting at a desk. And I was like, this is not XPlay. It's a long way from where XPlay had started. I think Adam talked about that too, over the different incarnations. One point they're doing big production numbers and they're doing all these comedy bits and they have this big set. And now it's just 5 people sitting at a desk, just talking about video games. So, they didn't have time to really figure it all out because the money was being mismanaged, but then it walked away. And it was like, okay, well, we know Olivia walked away with 7 figures, where she was supposed to show up for 2 years and she only showed up once. Now, where did that money go?
Smart lady, Olivia. Smart lady.
Look, when we go back, she worked deals like that all the time. Like she had made her contracts, or everything I was told was that she had made her contracts so that, she had the freedom to go do other projects. And the idea in the beginning was, we'll let her go for a week or two so she can shoot a cameo on a show or a small walk-on spot on a TV show or something. But then she started getting like lead roles, and now she had to go away for long periods of time. And in that last year, she just used it as an excuse to show up like 4 times. Because her contract allowed her to do that. And so she knew how to exploit things like that. But, to say, okay, you took 7 figures of that money for this G4 startup, and she walked away with that only showing up once for the Thanksgiving special, and that's it. And then, you start hearing about the money that the guy she was dating, from Comcast, he walked away with a huge golden parachute. I guess Blair walked away with a huge golden parachute, and some of the other people did. And then toward the end, the last survivors there, they intended to not pay them. It closed up because when it shut down, we had just had I was in Tucson with Chris, and we were having the first public screening of Attack of the Dock. And we had a great night. It was a great screening. Audience loved it. It was former G4 fans, people who didn't know about G4, and they loved the documentary, so they wanted to go learn about G4. And it was awesome. And the next day, I guess Chris flew out first thing in the morning, and then I was still in the hotel, and we heard that G4 closed up. It was like, are you kidding? I'm still sitting there with my G4 hat, my G4 t-shirt. And I'm like, really? Yeah, just now it's closed. And then we started hearing right away that they were not going to pay the last crew, and so when they did the second to the last layoffs, they laid off like the key executives and producers and things like that, and they all got a payout, and then those people that they left at the last group to keep the lights on, they weren't going to get paid at all until the state of California got involved and said, you have to pay these people, and so they finally did. But, to have some people who walked away with, steamer trunks full of money, and then you're going to screw the people that kept the place going to the very end, was just horrible. I don't know, I can't say too much about it, but I had started kind of working with one of the other people who was on the Attack of the Dock, and a producer that I know who was involved in the Firefest documentary for Hulu. And we kind of started outlining like a docuseries about what happened at G4, where the key thing was going to be, where did that money go? And why did it fail the way it did?
That would have been excellent.
So it's been a little kind of bogged down with all my personal stuff, but
someone needs to. I mean, there was one of the sad things was Washington Post with Launcher. They were looking pretty heavily into it. I know Nate Grayson was. I had heard talks of a book, but he eventually did some kind of other book projects. I don't know, but Launcher had closed, and so a lot of that emphasis on that reporting had gone away with it. It is weird. It just feels like this untapped mine for potential, because it's such a weird storyline. The guy, like the executive, the guy who he dates, Olivia Cole. I can't talk anymore. I give up.
Olivia Munn.
Thank you, Olivia Munn. And then he able to talk his dad into bringing back G4, and then his executive's office is a recreation to Emperor Palpatine's room from Star Wars. It just gets weirder and weirder all the way down. Like Frost said in the interview, is like, what happened to all those computers? Like they bought all this stuff and it never got used. Like, where did all that go? Like, what was with that? There's so many weird questions. There's so many weird questions.
They spend so much money on that studio and then building it out to be this really, state-of-the-art production facility. And I know how much they put into it because I had worked there. I actually did Let's Ask America with Kevin Pereira after Attack of the Show had shut down. And, and that was at Victory Studios. And it looked totally different. I mean, they remodeled everything, they upgraded everything, and they spent a fortune on that. And then turned around and sold it to this esports company. Well, that's a whole bunch of money. Where did that go? Was that money out of Comcast directly, or was that money from G4's startup budget? And if that was the case, why did they take so much of that startup budget and sink it just into that building, where like the throne room, that you're talking about, that apparently after spending all that money to recreate the Jedi throne room, they couldn't ever show it on camera because of copyright reasons. It's like, what a waste of money. They had, when I talked to them in the beginning, there was a planned revenue stream because they had 3 studios and 3 control rooms and 3 switchers. And they were going to have one side doing half of the G4 programming, the other side doing the other half of it. And then the third studio and control room was going to be outside clients, where they were going to have a steady stream of people coming in to shoot pilot shows, or maybe once a month going to shoot a bunch of shows and then go away for a little bit. And that was going to keep money coming. Well, that never happened. It just kind of went to waste. They had a whole big plan they spent a fortune having the whole building wired up so that they could have the hosts plug in on their own without a crew, turn on a couple lights, plug in, and they could either play a game live that people could watch them, or they could do a vibe check, and it was supposed to be a really good idea. And then apparently, like immediately, they shut it down and said for some reason it was going to be too expensive to have them doing it, and so they never let them do it. And I was like, well, then where did all this money go? And like when G4 was done, they obviously sold that building. Well, they got a lot of money out of it. It was like $30 million or something for the studio. It was like, okay, well, who got that $30 million?
Then, yeah, at that point, I'm putting on my conspiracy theory hats. I'm like, okay, so did this get put together because they knew it was going to fail? Because like it doesn't take a rocket scientist to like, this seems like a pretty risky endeavor. And you're like, oh, well, then did someone? I don't know. I don't know. I have so many questions. I wish I could get answered, but maybe in time more will shake out. Maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, my basic theory was that it started with a good idea. You also have to remember, like, it all started with Olivia suggesting to the guy from Comcast that she was dating that, hey, we should bring back Attack of the Show. And I always felt like that was because she wasn't getting the acting parts that she had been getting, and she was getting a little bit older. And she missed the job security of always being able to come back to G4. Like she'd go and do TV shows or she'd do a movie or something, but she always had Attack of the Show in her back pocket. Much like Joel McHale always did with The Suit. No matter what movies he got, what TV shows he got, when he was doing Community, he still kept The Suit because he always knew he had that to fall back on in between jobs. And I think she missed that because otherwise she hated that show. The last year or so, she hated being part of that show. She was doing everything she could to try to get out of rehearsals and being there. And then once she announced she had that mid-season replacement pilot, that was it. She came in that day and she made a big announcement because everybody was nervous. And she said, I am 100% committed to Attack of the Show. And we all kind of laughed like, yeah, she's gone. That's, and that's exactly what she did. From there on out, she showed up 4 more times, 2 because she was obligated to do Comic-Con that summer, and twice to promote her book. And that was it. And then she was just gone. And we never knew. Did she leave? Did she not leave? And we would have loved to have done it like we did with Kevin. Do a whole bunch of retrospectives, show his best of stuff, do a beautiful, again, it was Mike Shaw did that beautiful Kevin Going Away piece, where he's walking through that gallery of all his famous characters. And I just love that part. And the fact that they finished that bit off after that wonderful, sentimental, emotional piece, they finished it off with Kevin getting shot in the parking garage by Dude Manrod was just perfect. That summarized G4 experience. It was just that dark humor and everything. We would have loved to have done stuff like that with her on the way out, but we never had an official I'm gone, and the way she dragged it out was horrible. So the fact that she was the one who's, saying, hey, let's bring it back. It was like, why? You hated it, but she loved the job security. She could always come back to it. But I think then because she was dating that guy, when they broke up before G4 relaunched, I don't know if he just then lost interest in it or, if the whole thing changed. And I think somebody in that chain looked at the whole thing and said, hey, we can get some money out of this. Because I think they couldn't figure out how to make it work. You've read the articles, so I'm sure you saw like their expectations for income, in quarterly, numbers. It was just absurd. They were never going to make that kind of money on Twitch and YouTube. And they didn't do anything to promote it on cable, so the TV presence was nothing. And they were spending nothing on advertising. It was just like, why did you think this was going to work? They did not research it at all. I didn't know the YouTube marketplace. I learned about it when the Frost thing happened. And then the more the haters were talking about, how the landscape works now, that's how I was learning that, oh yeah, G4 was never going to work. I still maintain it could. If they had done it properly, it could have seriously competed in the YouTube landscape and done really well. But I think, they were still going to have that resistance from YouTubers who looked at it and said, they're coming in here with Comcast money, Comcast influence, Comcast talent, they could squash us all, and so I think that's why there was such hate toward it. They just looked at it as a threat. If they come in here, like a Walmart or an Amazon coming into a marketplace and just killing all the local mom and pop shops, but because they handled it so badly, they never stood a chance. It wasn't authentic. It was, it was just badly conceived. They didn't have the support they needed, and they cut the budgets. which our budgets were already too low, but they cut them even more. They were like, no, if you're going to do this right, you have to learn from our mistakes there and actually cut, increase the budgets, do bigger scale stuff. Recognize that G4 was at its most popular when we were doing the huge production numbers and the big studio gags and the jumping in the pie or the wrestling in the oatmeal, the big greased pig chase for the 1,000th show, which nobody ever figured the pig could jump over the hay, and got loose in the studio. But that's always when it was at its best. So instead, they cut the bits down and just turned it into one food fight gag after another. It's like, no, this was never going to work. Fans were going to reject it. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, hopefully, if my life settles down a bit, I plan to get back to work on it. Right now, it would be like 4 episodes. I already wrote the outline for it, because it's a great mystery. On the surface, people look at it and go, if they knew about it at all, they know that G4 failed because of Frost. That's all they know, and it's like, no, there's a whole other story here that went on, and there's a lot of questions.
The YouTubers thing is interesting because I have experienced there are certain people on YouTube who seem to have a very vested interest in never actually discussing what might have happened there besides, Frost bad. I'm like, part of me's like, why though? It's so much more interesting, but
yeah, well, I'm just saying, you want to dissect it and, say, well, there's a bunch of unanswered questions here. Why did this go so badly? That it basically ruined the brand, and then people tried to bring it back again. There were some guys that were trying to do it, but there were also a group of people that were going to try it. It's like they ignored the fact that Attack of the Dock ever happened, and now they wanted to do something, or for this most recent anniversary or next year's anniversary of Attack of the Show or something, and they tried to get me involved in it. I'm like, we already did it. And they're a bunch of fans, and they don't have any personal connection to the show, which is why they were trying to connect with me. And I'm like, I'm telling you right now, we were from the family, and we couldn't get people to participate in it. You're never going to get people involved in this. And I explained how much Chris had to do from a legal perspective to be able to use all that footage.
It's a good documentary. I mean, you guys did a good job. Like I had nitpicks, but I have nitpicks about everything, but you did a good job. You did what you set out to do, and it reminded me of how much why I loved G4. It was fun. It was a good time. You didn't know what was going to happen. It made nerd culture seem cool, which that's what it did. It's funny to me that in this nerd TV show that the nerds then decide themselves to form into cliques. That is kind of funny, but I guess that's just how humans are. We're very cliquish, even when we're the rejects.
Like it was one of those things about the show, and it came down to 3 years after the show had been canceled. I had run into Jerry Duggan, who was one of the writers and producers, and he went on from the show to run some of the Marvel comic books. Like he did Deadpool and he did Guardians of the Galaxy for a while, which was actually fun because in Deadpool 2, they gave him a shout out. And they were trying to tell somebody where to meet them. And he said, Jerry Duggan Lane. And I was the only one in the theater, probably the only one who saw the movie who got that. And I was like, Jerry, but I run into him at an anniversary screening for Eurotrip. And we started talking about doing like a get together because I wanted to, throw some kind of like little reunion get together at my house, do it. And we started putting it together, and it fell apart, because that clique, was like, well, it didn't come from us. So, and we see Kevin twice a year, so we don't need to see the rest of you. Kind of like that. And, I had sent out invites to a lot of like friends of the show. And I had to tell them, I'm like, look, I know you're coming to see Kevin and Olivia, or you're coming to see Adam and Morgan, or none of those people are coming. I was like, and I could see them showing up going, even though like I had a great time hanging out with, people like Master Control or engineering, or, the person who booked the commercial spots, the traffic, some or the talent booker. I enjoyed seeing everybody and hanging out. We were all telling stories, and that was all great. But I'm like, that's not why these friends of the show would be coming. And so it was kind of embarrassing, and I had to shut it down. Now I said, look, everybody can still come over and hang out. We'll still have a party, but I'm kind of removing the Attack of the Show reunion part of it because there wasn't the support there for it. And then they had to take it a step further, and then they duped me into believing that if I did it again, this time they'd all participate. And I did, and they didn't participate. It was like, so that's kind of how they were. That, that's like the downside of the whole thing. But, in general, like with the rest of us, we were all pretty tight. Again, we still hang out together, we still work together. And every time some crazy thing happens on the internet, we all go immediately start doing around the net, making jokes and saying that, or like we all start on a thread going ATN, 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 or like when I see Chris, and so it's like Chris Gore, Chris Gore. Yeah.
Is that why? Because it is. Beside Chris Gore is probably the one that's most open to talking about G4 of people that had any kind of presence on. But it's really hard again to contact. Olivia's mentioned, Morgan's another. There are a lot of people that are like really hard to get a hold of for comments, interest, anything. Is it the click thing, or people just kind of like, we don't want to go back there because it might hurt our career? Or?
I don't know if some of them want to, because some of them have kind of moved on. I know Morgan's kind of gone off camera, to corporate stuff, and obviously Olivia has her career, doesn't want to go back to it too much. And I don't know about Kevin. Kevin seemed to be more like, he'd be glad to talk about it if it's something he did, but if it's not something that came from him or originated from him, I think he doesn't seem to be as eager to, participate. And then Adam was kind of a whole other thing. Adam kind of went crazy on Twitter for a while. He ended up blocking me on Twitter because when they wrapped up, they, since they never got a goodbye show, one of the producers had friends in San Francisco that had a studio, so they hosted them having a wrap-up show. And in 2 hours, they did all this show, and they gave a lot of kudos to people like, there was a woman on the show who was a segment producer that, she would produce some of the outside comedy bits and stuff, and she had been heavily involved in that God of War parody that they did, that they were all getting involved in toward the end. And she was clearly trying to shop herself as a director with G4 closing down. And so during this 2 hour period, they're giving kudos to the directors like her when she didn't actually direct X-Play. And I knew the two studio directors, and they didn't mention either of them at all. And I was really upset about that because I knew how hard those two directors, who were both very experienced television directors, how hard they had to work in order to kind of wrangle cats or herd cats, because, a lot of people didn't know what they were doing. And after all that, they totally ignored the two of them in that 2 hour goodbye thing. And that really ruffled my feathers. And so I tweeted out to them, all of them, and said, you had 2 hours. You didn't thank Genji or Lisa, but you thank somebody who never actually did direct on the show, who's now trying to pretend to be a director. And, Adam blocked me. I was like, you know what? You could have just apologized or something, or said, oh, yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right. Genji and Lisa were great. Sorry. We should have said something. But instead, he just blocked me. And I said, well, it's a badge of honor to get blocked by Adam Sessler. But he, I never really had much to do with him. And, they were very kind of internalized, with their group. They would be very nice to each other, but they wouldn't really interact with everybody outside that group. I only had like one real conversation with him. We both ended up out on the balcony, one day during a pre-tape. And I had a trainee, and so he was doing the segment by himself. And then Adam had a smoking break, so he came out. And we talked, and he was very nice. And I thought, oh, that's good. I had a nice conversation with Adam. That's great. But from there on out, never made eye contact, never talked to me. And that's how they were with everybody, the whole show. Just kind of how it went. So, I can see why. And Chris isn't afraid to talk about his experiences on it. I think, he's I think been very fair. Like there were things that we talked about, with the documentary that I thought we should have included some things that, like the Halo story, but he wanted it to be just fun, nostalgic, exactly like you said, reminding people why they love G4. and why it was fun. I thought it was very cathartic coming off of new G4 that this was able to kind of, like, it reminded me, I had a bad, taste in my mouth about G4 after my experience interviewing with them and the way they treated me and the whole thing. And then, all of a sudden I saw the first cut of the documentary. And even before that, I had to go through my footage to send to Chris. And when I went through it, and I was like, yeah, this is reminding me why I love G4. So, the documentary, it's going to be awesome. And that's all it was. And we never could get into the real in-depth, stuff because, people criticize us for it. I was like, look, we had two choices. We either make it super nitpicky, and super down in the weeds for the super fans, who already knew most things about the show, or we do it for a broader audience, so that it can have a legacy. Now because of the documentary, there'll always be people who stumble across the documentary and go, wow, that looks like a lot of fun. I want to find out more about Attack of the Show. And they can appreciate it, without knowing all the inside stuff. So I thought it all worked. Like, there were a bunch of challenges. Like, Chris had big ideas for going around and shooting interviews with people sitting down, and then COVID happened. It's like he couldn't go anywhere. Nobody could go anywhere. So we did it all over, Zoom, and, and then new G4 opening threw everything off. I was like, well, wait a minute. And do we talk about this or do we not talk about it? And Chris ultimately made a good decision, which was, what, we're going to let that be its own thing. Because, they're their own world. And, and I think I kind of agreed with that and said, I wish them luck. They can do their own thing and, just don't tarnish our legacy, which they did. But, so otherwise, I thought that was a good idea. Let them have their thing. So he was always good.
So we're wrapping up here. So, I don't know how much you want to go into your health problems, but you were saying that you have a lot of health struggles. You've really been struggling to be able to get disability support. What's going on with you with all that?
Well, I had started having problems in 1996. I'd been at the Golf Channel a year and a half, and I started having problems with spasming and pain, with my legs, and I wouldn't be able to walk. And gradually over time, it kept kind of radiating up my spine. And eventually by 2006, it was spasms, these violent spasms, which turned out I was breaking my own back. And the disease, which is called ankylosing spondylitis. And it's a terrible, terrible bucket of horror, and it's a degenerative arthritic condition, autoimmune condition, that focuses on the spine itself and the hips and the ribs and the joints where the ribs connect to the spine. And then if when you have your pelvis and your hips, there's a part where the spine connects to that's called the sacrum, and it's a big joint, right? And it attacks mostly those areas. It can also attack the organs and the circulatory system, and especially the eyes. I've been very lucky because I haven't had any issues with that, knock on wood, but it's called uveitis, and it's usually a thing with ankylosing spondylitis that people end up going blind, with it. And so I've had it where I have this thing and someone finds out and they try to be sympathetic and they'll tell me, oh yeah, I play golf and after I play golf, I had terrible arthritis in my lower back. And they're talking about osteoarthritis, which is very common, very treatable. And I just look at them and go, yeah, mine was crushing my abdomen, breaking my spine in 12 places. And if it had gone undiagnosed and untreated, it would have blinded me and killed me. They go, oh, okay, so it's not the same thing. So it had been getting worse over time, because besides breaking my spine, it also was taking the vertebrae, and in those violent spasms, it was also twisting. So they were all out of alignment. And so that resulted in the scoliosis, which happened over a number of years. And I lost overall 20% of my height because with all those fractures in the cervical down through the lumbar, I had the 12 vertebrae had all lost 15 to 20% of their height. So overall, I had lost 20% of the height in my abdomen. So I'm actually 4 inches shorter or 5 inches shorter than I really am. Normally, I'd be like 5'11" and a half, and then now I measure it like sometimes 5'6" something, or
Wow,
5'7".
that is a big change.
Yeah, and it's all squished in your abdomen. So I kind of have like this troll under the bridge thing going, where between the hunched back and the bent to the right, and the fact that I'm all squishy in the middle, because I still have really long legs like somebody who's 5'11" and a half. I have really long arms and a big head like somebody who's 5'11" and a half. But then it's all this squishy little troll abdomen. So I said, at least I'm good for scaring children. But it was bad, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And over time, I would have these flare-ups, and I would lose my ability to walk and sit in chairs and do things over a period of time. And I kept wrestling with that. And then, actually right before G4 shut down, they threw us a party, like a going away thing, at Universal Studios. And we went, and I tried to ride just a couple of simple rides, like Jurassic Park and The Simpsons. So because I'm not good with roller coaster rides and stuff. So I did those, and they were just like simulator rides. And my spine got jerked all over the place, and I ended up in a flare-up, and I was a mess. And I had just had a bad flare-up. I was actually out when they called us to tell us G4 was being canceled, but they begged me to come back in and said, look, we'll pay you for the whole day if you come in. It's an all-hands meeting. I was like, all right. I got myself there and managed to get through it. But I would have these big flare-up episodes, and then I wouldn't be able to walk. I wouldn't be able to do all this stuff. And then just have these waves of spasms that every time was just crushing things and breaking things. And so finally, by 2014, we set out to get a diagnosis on this thing. I said, we're not going to stop now until we get a diagnosis. So I was working with the doctors, and things just dragged out too long, because every time they do a test and they wouldn't be able to make sense of it, I'd lose another 6 weeks. So pretty soon the year went by, and we got to October, and I was working on a show for MTV. It was a post show for a dating reality show called Are You the One? And this was like the after show. And I went to do it, and it was already nervous because it was one of the most notoriously difficult directors to work with in town, who didn't like anybody except one TD that we did. And actually the guy who had taken over from me at G4 when I originally didn't take the job, it was the only guy that he liked. Otherwise, this guy hated everybody. And so I'm doing this show, and I can't sit down because I'm just having these waves of spasms, and I'm screaming, and so we're doing the show, and they're going around the studio trying to find, a decent chair for me to sit in, because they think that's the issue. And I was like, I don't think that's the problem, and then finally the show was done. They sent 2 PAs to go get my car to bring it to the front of the building. And the director came over, and he said, look, I know you just went through hell. I just want you to know you did a perfect show despite all of that. I was like, oh man, that was pretty cool compliment from somebody, who doesn't like anybody, that who could have easily gone, what the hell was this? I had this guy screaming and standing up the whole time, switching the show. So, we did that, and then I kind of recovered a little bit. And then a week later, I had a day at Revolt, and I went, and I thought I could do it. And I was a mess right from the beginning. And they said, you can't stay. You can't do this. And so they booked somebody else, and then they brought a refrigerator or air conditioner dolly, that they use for moving that kind of stuff around. And they had me stand on it, and they wheeled me down to my car. They waited half an hour for me to be able to lift my leg enough to get into the car and then get home. And I tried to go to the doctor, and I got on an escalator, and I literally couldn't move my leg to get off the escalator. It threw me off the escalator. And then it was like a week later or two, I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. And they ended up taking me to the hospital. And then I was 2 months in and out of the hospital, and they kept trying to figure out what was going on, but they also weren't trying to figure out what was going on. They kind of knew, and they didn't want to deal with it. So they wanted me to go home and just be an outpatient. And so they lied. The insurance company lied. They all, just basically just send them home. And then finally, we did another MRI, and it showed a bunch of new fractures. And they said, okay, this is real. And so they sent me for a nerve conduction test, and they found that I have nerve pinches, like a big nerve is pinched in between L5 and S1, which is where you sit, and that's why people usually have back issues at L5, S1. So that was enough to say, all right, he needs treatment. He needs serious treatment. Something's going on here. And so they sent me to the Southern California Spine Institute, and Dr. Armstrong was the leader at the time. He was a rock star neurosurgeon, and he was the team leader. And he said, I'm going to put this together. We're going to get to the bottom of it. They figured out that it was the ankylosing spondylitis, and then they started me on treatments for it to stabilize it. I wasn't responding that well to the treatments in the beginning because what they do is biologic injections, and the injections suppress your immune system to stop the arthritis, but it also totally squashes your immune system. So you're vulnerable to everything. And if you do get sick, you get really sick. So I was going back and forth with like terrible sinus infections and then dental abscesses. I had to keep having teeth removed because once you start having a dental abscess, the tooth is gone basically. So we went through all that, and the doctors finally said by the end of 2015, you're not responding the way we wanted to. You're going to be in a wheelchair full time. We need you to go be in your family so you have support. And I went back to Florida for 6 months thinking I was done. But then I started responding to the injections. I had had some surgeries to fix the underlying issues. And the situation in Florida was horrible. Basically, my parents decided that this disease is an embarrassment to them and my disability is an embarrassment to them, and that they would prefer that I just keep it quiet and stop bothering people with it. And then they did a lot more terrible stuff than that. My friends and my doctors all said, just get away from them. They're making things worse. And I said, well, if I don't have to have them around and I can't do anything in Florida, and my mobility was better because of the injections, I'm going back to California. I'm not staying in Florida. And so I came back and I started trying to work again. And I said, forget disability. I'm going to work really hard to get back to work and show everybody I can work. But after 3 years of trying to do that, it just became obvious that I could not consistently work. The side effects of the medications, the condition, my reliability, probably more than anything, because I have side effects and things that come up that, I'm not reliable, and, so at that point we said, all right, I need to get on disability, and people weren't hiring. Because I think like when we first started talking, we were talking about the fact that, people are not great about hiring disabled people, because they worry about the legal liabilities. And in my case, people have said flat out that they worry that I'm a workman's comp liability. I'm like, I'm not planning on filing workman's comp with you. I just want to work, and I had jobs who would only hire me to come in and set up their network and make it look really fancy and pretty for a low price. And then as soon as it was up and running, boom, they get rid of me, replace me with young, dumb, and cheap, as I always call them. And it just happened too many times. My entire client roster, like nobody would hire me anymore. So I said, that's it. I need to go and do it. I was getting ready to file it right before COVID. And then COVID happened. And then there was a lot of confusion over, should I be on disability? Should I be on unemployment? And ultimately they told me I should be on unemployment for a while. And then I rolled into California disability. And I thought I had to wait until that was done in order to start the process for federal disability. But they said, no. They said, you don't have to wait. You can go ahead, do it, and you should do it. So I got that process started 3 years ago. And, like a lot of people, like what they did to you, they automatically rejected my initial claim, and then they rejected my appeal. And that took 2 years between the two of those. And then we started into the hearing. Now, by the hearing, I had gotten a congressman involved, which is a really good thing for anybody who's doing it. I don't know if, did you do that? Because I know you said you talked to a lawyer.
No, I did not try to ask my local congressman to help with the hearing.
Definitely do that, or a state senator, or your senator, not a state senator, but your actual senator. Because here's what happens: like they'll always talk about ways to expedite your claim, right? They can't expedite the claim at the application level. They can't expedite it at the appeal level, but they can expedite it at the hearing level. And now everybody always expedites it with dire need, but because everyone claims dire need, it doesn't really do much. But because I got the congressman involved, my file was also flagged with congressional inquiry and special case handling. And the congressional inquiry, I was told, was a very good thing and is not that common. And most of them had never heard of the special case handling. So they said that must be a really good thing. And it did get expedited. My lawyer kept being skeptical, saying, look, it's going to be 12 to 18 months. Yeah. And that's it. Nothing's going to happen. And then finally, they called me 9 days later, say they were already working on it, right after I filed my appeal. And part of that was they had, gotten the congressional inquiry, and it was tagged on my file. So, things did move a little quicker. So that was good. But my hearing's actually this week. So, I feel like I'm prepped. I feel like I know my case well. And I have prep session with my lawyer, just to be ready. But, and I just went through all the medical records with them, which was interesting because a year ago, I had a melanoma here and it got diagnosed with my new doctors and they had to do surgery to take it out. And I only knew the scar. I didn't know, and you can't even see it now. A year later, it's gone, which is amazing, that they were able to do that. But I only knew the scar. I never saw the actual surgery. And there were pictures that they took during the surgery and put in my medical records. And you see this giant borehole here where he cut all the skin out and everything. They cut it down to the fat. Oh my God. It looks like they drilled in my head, So, I feel like I know the whole thing well enough. And then, but, hypothetically, if, like from that stage, if you get turned down at the appeal, next is you have to sue Social Security in federal court. It takes 2 years to get a federal judge, to take on the case. And all they do is look at it and say, we think that the administrative law office should take a second look at this. And they usually assign it back to the same judge. And, they rarely overturn themselves. And it goes back and forth for years until finally the hearing office caves in and gives it to somebody else to look at, which is also kind of a wink and nod to like, get him appeal, get him apply, approve, actually do it. But it goes on for years. Yeah, it's kind of a mess. So hopefully I get approved here now at the hearing level.
That's hard though, because those sort of because you're not working, you don't have a source of income, and so how are you I'm speaking for anyone in that situation, how are you supposed to meet your needs? It's a mess. I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard, and I don't, unless you've been through it or you have a loved one or someone that's going through it. It's hard. It's really demeaning. Being disabled, trying to get disability, all of it really has affected my own sense of self-worth. And
because there's a stigma attached to it. There's so many people who, they have this attitude if you go on disability, you're taking my money, so that you can't work. And it's not like that at all. It's, and this, it's, it's based, what you get paid out is based on what you paid into the system. So in my case, for 20 years, besides having paid a lot into Social Security just through my regular work, for that 20 years that I was making a boatload of money, at the peak of my career, I was paying the max into Social Security every year by September. And by September, I didn't have to even pay anything more to Social Security because I had paid the max out of it, right? So I'm a rare case it's actually going to get, a decent amount of money on the payout, but I think that's partly why they're fighting it even more because, I'm also 52 going on 53. They'll have to keep paying that until I'm 65, and then they'll switch me to Social Security. Well, they don't want to do that. They prefer if I was 60, 62, they only have to pay my disability for 2 or 3 years. But another thing that because I'm assuming you under 40?
I am. I am.
So what you're going to get hit with. It was exactly what you described before with the employment advocate, who has the big book of jobs.
I love the big book of jobs.
Yeah. So they're going to say, okay, so you can't do your career anymore, but you could do this. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be anything close to what you're doing now. They will literally turn around and say, well, true, you can't be a journalist anymore, but you could work at McDonald's. And they'll actually think that's a legitimate equivalent, and they don't care that it's nowhere near what you were doing or the money you were making. You will just be employed is all they care about. And what happens is after 50, they don't do that anymore. Basically they don't expect you to change careers. So they'll, like in my case, they'll just try to argue that there's other jobs in my career that I could do. Good luck with that. There's nothing I can do. I've tried. No one will hire me to do anything else, and I can't start over with anything else. And all of the jobs are very similar in my case. I'm still going to end up sitting for long periods of time. I can't do any jobs where I have to be standing for long periods of time. I can't, and my bad posture and my hunch and everything makes people uncomfortable. So I've had 5 places now that I used to work for who all said that I am now on the bottom of a list of do not hire unless literally no one else is available. They want the option in case they get desperate and need a live body in the chair, but otherwise they won't hire me. So
I didn't realize they kept such a list.
And that they actually told me was, and a couple of the places I told them, well, then don't bother calling, because when you do finally call me, I'm going to tell you I'm not available, because screw you if that's what you're going to do to me, and I also knew I couldn't do the work anymore. Being a technical director is like being an air traffic controller. It's a very fast-paced, stressful, high, anyway, it's a very difficult job, and you have to be very sharp and very on it, and you have to do a lot of risk management stuff as you're going. I was always trying to identify potential problems, like, way ahead of the show. Like, hey, this is going to be a technical problem if we do this, and I can't do that anymore. I'm not firing on all cylinders anymore, between the disease and the medications and, things. There's a lot of days I can barely do anything, and then I'll end up, being hit with a side effect that sometimes take me down for 7 to 30 days. And so what job is going to put up with that?
It does. It makes it very hard to plan, and plan is key for work.
Yeah. And then what are you supposed to do in the meantime? What they do is they count on that you're going to have savings to live on, or you're going to have a spouse or partner who's going to keep you housed and keep your bills paid during that time, or your family's going to take you in and help. Well, I'm one of those cases that doesn't have any of that. My little savings I had, because I got wiped out when I first got sick and I didn't work for a year. I had rebuilt a little bit of a savings prior to COVID, but then in the first couple of months of COVID, it was gone. That was it. So the rest of the time I haven't been able to work, and it's been a combination of unemployment, California disability. And then once all that was gone, I have my award show work. I still work like 5 weekends a year, which then the hypocrisy in Social Security, I work 5 weekends a year, and they have a problem with that.
Well, because can't you see this man can work? He says he can work.
Right. They don't get that. Like, I do an award show and I'll work like 2 days or 3 days, and then I'll be wrecked for 2 days or 3 days afterwards. I mean, just completely like unconscious on the couch, gone, can't move, can't do anything. And I have to recover from it. Luckily, there's gaps in between. The first year I was back doing it was not this year, but last year. And my feet got torn up because of all the walking we had to do. And somebody's like, well, we don't have to do that much walking. And I'm like, yeah, for you. For me, my normal walk is from the bedroom to the recliner. So now when I had to walk like a couple of miles to get from a parking lot to the truck site for the award show, my feet got torn up, and I was covered in scars and scabs and bleeding. And I knew when I took my shoe off, my feet were bloody. I was like, oh, this is bad. And those scars and scabs and everything were there for a year and a half. Some of them have just gone away. And, I pointed that out to the doctors, but, because did you have to do the exams with the like DPSS or, whatever the local, like Medicare, examiners and stuff, like social services?
No, I had to submit like different records or meet with my own physician, but no, I didn't have to do that.
Okay. Yeah. So you didn't have to, but I had to do that twice, actually 3 times, because on the application level, I had to go once. And then at the appeal level, I had to go twice because they wanted to do a mental exam and then a physical exam. And those places are a joke, because they just lie, and they just, because I've seen the reports that they file and it's ridiculous. They just completely lie. So part of what I have to do in the hearing now is discredit that doctor. So luckily, because I caught all the lying the first time, I kept extensive notes for the second visit that we're going to use to discredit it. Like I wrote down everything about that visit. And, it contradicts a lot of what he filed in his report. So, we're having to do stuff like that. But then they, look at the 5 weekends a year and go, well, that's working too much. And they're basing that on not the number of days, but how much money. And that's because for the award shows, I make, like, especially the Oscars, I make a crazy amount of money for 3 days worth of work. But it's like, that's the only money I may have for months, and they would prefer if I worked part-time every week and didn't make any money, but it would be much harder for me to work, consistently, even a part-time job. So I'm supposed to survive, but I'm not supposed to have any income. I'm not supposed to be able to do it. And, it just, they put you in all these corners with this. Somehow you're supposed to be able to do it. And, that's my problem. I mean, I've seen the statistics that just from, I think it was last year, the article I sent you, that just in a short period of time that they looked at, 30,000 people died waiting to get their determination. And I just saw another one, a follow-up article that said 10,000 people a year die waiting to get their, Social Security determination. And my cousin's brother-in-law was one of those cases, that he was at the appeal level, and before he got his decision on his appeal, he died. And this is what's happening to people, but also people become bankrupt and become homeless, which is kind of where I'm at. I hadn't been able to pay my rent in a while, and I was fighting an eviction, but I managed to work out a deal, to kind of stop all that. But that deal means I have to leave by the end of the month. And it's like the gap between the disability and the eviction just could not close. So there's like a 4-month gap here where I'm going to be out of the apartment and gone, but I'm still waiting for the decision on my disability. And then, it's because you have the hearing and then it takes 30 to 60 days. It's pretty much 45 days to get a decision. And then it takes 2 months to get enrolled in the system and get paid, and can actually take a little bit longer if there's complications. So the best case scenario, I have my hearing this week and then I'm looking at January before I get paid. So it's like I have to survive from October 1st until January or February. Luckily, the award season is starting again. So I'll have a little bit of work here and there. And otherwise, I've just been surviving on a little help from friends. Like that I set up a GoFundMe, but then I also had people just helping me out, on their own directly to me, and, just getting by. But then had to do things like, well, look, something's got to go. I can't pay the rent anymore. Let's see how long I can survive without paying the rent. And just had to do that. But it's the stress of it has taken years off my life. It's just been, nightmares. And, I got so sick back in May with the eviction stuff that I was down for 2 months. They had to delay the trial, because I requested a trial on it, so it takes longer. But, we had to postpone it 2 months because I was so sick. And, and it's just, it is humiliating because there's also a lot of people who just assume, well, you just messed up your life, And it's like, no. And they base it a lot of times on things like, well, Aunt so-and-so who lives in Podunk, like Western New York, well, she got hers in 6 months. And it's like, yeah, because she's in a part of rural New York where they don't have a big backlog at the Social Security office versus Los Angeles, she was in her 60s, so they're going to approve her faster because she's only going to be on disability a couple of years. I have a good friend in Florida who got approved right away because he was only going to be on disability 2 years. And then he went to Social Security and that was it. So they were going to be quicker to approve it versus like, I'm not even 53, and I'll be on it until I'm 65. then also the conditions. Some things they can't argue with as much. This one is tough. A lot of people can't see it, although I don't know how they can't see it when I'm standing there and I'm all hunched over. I've had people that are totally frightened by my appearance, with it. Mark Maron was my favorite. My YouTube channel, my slogan for it is the quote from Mark Maron at a screening of Sword of Trust, where he kept referring to me as that weirdo with the TV camera. And he was pulling people to put in between us. Because I had to get to the bathroom and there was a big crowd and I couldn't get to the bathroom without getting around the crowd. And so I kept, kind of passing him or bumping up toward him. I think he thought I was following him or he was freaked out because of my appearance. Yeah. And it's like, I can't convince people,
Yeah.
Or, when people try to chime in and give advice, from home, they say, well, you can work from home. There's plenty of jobs you can do from home. And I have to explain some of these problems I have, like I pass out every day, and sometimes it'll just be for 15 minutes. Sometimes it'll be for hours. Sometimes it'll be on and off all day. And that's a side effect of the medications, some other stuff that's going on. What job am I going to do if I pass out? And they don't understand that, like, I fought like hell to not go on disability. When I came back in 2016, I said, I'm going to work. I'm prove that I can get back to work. People will hire me. And it never happened. And by the end, I realized, now I know what the doctors are talking about. I just can't do it. And that was the hardest thing I ever had to come to terms with. Because my career was my whole life. I'd been like that, working in TV since I was in high school. I had made movies. I cried in the doctor's office when he told me I had to go on disability. And he said, well, what's the matter? And I said, I have started, at the time, it was 7 TV channels that I helped start up and launch. And I said, I've done the Oscars red carpet every year for 25 years. I've made movies. I've had movies in film festivals. I've done it. And I said, and now I'm going to be in some trailer park in San Bernardino eating dog food out of a can because I had been told that you couldn't live on the amount of Social Security. So, it was, I did not want to have to go that route. All my hopes and dreams are gone, because that's all I ever had. And, everything is qualified now by, but, snap back to reality and remember that, with your condition, you're never going to do this. You're never going to do that.
I share many of those feelings, Christopher. It's a very hard demeaning experience. It's hard. I think especially as guys, and maybe this probably is true for humans in general, we take a lot of our self-worth, like our ability to perform, like in our careers or financially. And it's like, it's like you take away that stuff and you have to try to find value in something else. And that's not easy. Not easy.
No, I mean, I kind of did that with my YouTube channel, where I had started it even before I filed the disability. But I felt that, like, look, this is something I can do pretty casually. Essentially, I'm just going to a movie. I just happen to stay and film the Q&A after. And then it got a little more complex as I started doing a lot of editing and upping the production value because, after doing this for 35 years, I'm not going to do something without doing that. My bar is always very high. And, and I also, in a lot of ways with those videos, it would be like Attack of the Show. I would have moments where I was like, you know what, in Attack, we would do this. And I would do something that would be really funny and I would go with it. But, even that has reached a point that I can't do it anymore. It just takes too much out of me to go to the screenings, get the front row, film the whole thing, do the data management, do the editing. And by the end of it, because I'm all excited in the beginning, like, I'm going to edit 5 videos. I'm going to get caught up. And after I get the first one finished and uploaded, all the metadata done, I'm wiped out. And it's 2 months before I can do another one. So,
that's why I have my editor, Chris, who is wonderful. And I just wouldn't be able to do this without him. I understand, man. There was a fun conversation. There's a real lot about stuff about G4TV that was new to me, and I think will interest people. Where can people find you if they're interested in your stuff? Like, point to a documentary or an interview you did that you like. What do you want people to find?
Most of my social stuff like Twitter, X, and Instagram, and even on front or Facebook, there's a page there that are all Front Row Flynn, and my YouTube channel is Front Row Flynn. That's all pretty consistent. So if they go through that, they can find it. Instagram is a little weird, because I haven't been able to go to movie screenings for a while. So at one point I just was pushing politics, stuff that I was doing. And then I've gotten into an AI kick now where I started messing with AI, but my trick was I want to figure out how to break the rules of AI. Like AI won't let you do certain things. I wanted to prove that AI does not understand metaphor or subtext. And through that, I can do things that are actually pretty borderline offensive, but AI doesn't get it and it lets it go through. And then when I tell the AI, oh, that's wonderful, the AI laughs and says, oh, it's very humorous. Like, you have no idea what you just allowed me to do. So I've created like a fake porn persona. It's like my face, and it creates like this porn guy. And I buy these snack trays, like these food trays. It's like little snack foods without eating sugar stuff. So it's just like little crackers and sausage and cheese and hard salami. And I opened that up and I was like, wow, what a wonderful porn name. That would be awesome. So I created this character and I call him Hard Salami. And I've just been doing a whole series of like fake movie titles and, movie posters with this character that, again, I'm getting the AI to do things it should not really be doing. And they're still okay. They're still, it's not, pornographic necessarily, but it's one of those things you have to read into it. But if you do read into it, you find it very fun. So that a lot of people, I think, just don't understand what I'm doing. Other people find it hysterical. So, if they go to the Instagram looking for all the movie stuff, you got to go down a little bit now.
Okay.
And I'm not really on Twitter very much anymore. And when I am, it's usually political. But
politics is a constant temptation with social media.
It's so hard though, because you're not going to win anybody over, and all you do is fighting.
I know.
So I try not to do that. But then a lot of the stuff gets ported over from Instagram over to my Facebook Front Row Flynn page. So but there's also a lot of movie stuff on there and do it. And then the GoFundMe I had, I have a link to that in the Instagram thing on my bio. If anybody is able to help with that, because I have to get through these next 4 months, and it's like anything that I can do to do that would be great.
Yes, please, audience. If any of you want to help out Christopher, check out his GoFundMe. I sure would be a big help for him right now.
Yeah, because if that happens, then if I can get through the next 4 months and everything's good, then this nightmare's over, and I can kind of rebuild my life. And like that, like you were saying, like the bar is way down now. I've kind of accepted that all my little hopes and dreams and stuff are gone. I'm just looking to not be constantly in existential crisis, and which is what's happened the last few years. Especially, it was right after the Attack of the Dock premiere. All of a sudden I got hit with some bad news that I was losing some of my support. So ever since, I've just been struggling to get by, do it. But I have made it to this point. Like when I first got turned down for disability, I thought there's no way I'm going to last another year doing an appeal. I've lasted 2 more years. So if we just get past this last part, then hopefully you get yours done, and then
people, I hope so too.
Well, I'm just glad that you're at this. I would have felt a lot worse if you were telling me you were just filing the application and I knew what the next 3 years were going to be like for you. I would feel really awful because I've been there, but at least you're down to the last round of it, hopefully, and then that's it.
I hope so.
It'll be good.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ear.
Hope so.
That's going to do it for us today. Thank you guys for checking out CultureScape. The show is put together with the help of my friend Chris Holloway, who makes me look way more competent than I actually am. And of course, a Young Voices Journalism Advocacy organization. And this wouldn't have happened without viewers like you. So until next time, my friends, keep geeking out. Hey there, gang! If you are a fan of CultureScape, and I know you are, and want to get involved in supporting the show, well, now you can! By joining the CultureScape Patreon, you'll help support me and my editor Chris as we create the show and produce more quality journalism. For just $5 or $10 a month, you not only help us, but get access to our exclusive members-only Discord. You'll also get to vote on and suggest new guests for the interview. So if you are a fellow weeb and love CultureScape, then come join us today on Patreon.